listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
It's the mother of all talk shows, all right. It's the Open University of the Airwaves. There are no tuition fees, and you are positively encouraged to talk back to the undereducated teacher. That will be me. It is the College of Knowledge, and we'll be branching out this evening into some fields of study we haven't visited for quite some time, including the royal family, as a brouhaha and opera begins to brew over in the United States between Harry and Meghan. Another American wife tears apart the British royal family. At least that's the narrative, according to some. You can have your say on our poll. And we'll, of course, be looking at the British and American political scenes, particularly the British one, where Sir Keith Starmer, the Labour leader, having promised to be 20 points ahead of Boris Johnson, now finds himself 13 points behind. And independence, which was riding high on its cock horse when I arrived back in Scotland, has now been knocked off in the lists. My jousting is working. The SNP have gone into reverse, and those who support the maintenance of the Union of Great Britain are now back in charge. Of course, there's time. Things can change. Manchester United just beat Manchester City 2-0. Some fools say there's no God. I'll be here for the next 3 hours. It's the mother of all talk shows, so fasten your seatbelts. It's rock and roll radio with pictures.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Now, I am not, of course, a royalist, and you wouldn't normally find me giving over some precious broadcast time for a royal story, but this one simply cannot be ignored. Here we have a situation where the Duke of Edinburgh, the grandfather, aged 100, is lying in a hospital bed, having just had an operation at the age of 100. And his grandson and his fancy wife from the United States, Hollywood second or third division, are slandering the mother of the family, the Queen herself. It seems extraordinarily crass timing to be attacking the royal family in Britain for money, because make no mistake about it, that's what it is. It isn't out of a burning determination to get something off their chest. Harry and Meghan are doing this for the money. And by goodness, it's big money. A $100 million deal with Netflix. A $10 million deal with Oprah Winfrey. And presumably the book sales and other spin-offs to go with it. There is no justification for a young man who lived a life of spectacular privilege, paid for by the taxpayer, including their fancy royal wedding, to turn on the rest of their family in this degrading and spectacular way. And of course, it has got the popular press, and not just the popular press, in a frenzy here in Britain. And it brings forth the old saw that happened before I was born. But I grew up hearing about how an American woman, Mrs. Wallace Simpson, had devastated the British royal family, despite being twice divorced and multiply compromised, at least in several divorce cases as correspondent. Mrs. Wallace Simpson, an American Third Division society debutante, well, perhaps that's not the word for her, managed to win the heart of the very short-serving King of England, who then was forced to abdicate from the throne in order to marry her. To be fair, they stayed together then for the rest of their lives, but it prejudiced a lot of people against second, third division society women from the United States marrying into the royal family. And yet, when this star, shall I put it that way, of a second or third rate American soap opera called Suits married into the royal family, there was a very great deal of goodwill. I even watched that royal wedding myself, didn't you? But it very quickly turned sour. And we'll be investigating this evening whether or not the fact that Meghan Markle is mixed race had anything at all to do with it. Were the royals cold and unwelcoming to her because of her colour? No, if you ask the late Princess Diana, who was as white as could be and got a pretty cold and unwelcome entry into the royal family firm themselves. Well, we'll be talking about that. In fact, we've got a poll running on it. Let me give it to you now. Do you believe Meghan and Harry have been victimised by the Queen? A, yes. B, no. C, they're publicity hounds. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. We'll be talking to Caleb Maupin about the current political situation in the United States, where Joe Biden, though he doesn't now know it, is getting into his stride as the President of the United States. He's even launching bombing raids on Syria. Meet the new boss. He's just like the old boss. And he's threatening all kinds of horrors down the road for Russia and China. And all the fancy promises about rejoining the Iran nuclear deal have all turned to ash in his mouth. There now will be no American rejoining the nuclear deal, not least because Joe just killed 22 Iranians in Syria in retaliation, he said, for pro-Iranian Iraqi militias continuing to fire mainly harmless rockets at American military installations in a country they have been asked to leave by the sovereign parliament of Iraq and by the overwhelming majority of Iraqi people. Hats off to His Holiness, the Pope, by the way. Pope Francis has just toured Iraq in what undoubtedly was the most dangerous expedition of his papacy, and he did it to try and bring about reconciliation and stability in Iraq. Unfortunately, the United States administration, headed by one of the Pope's followers, is not actually taking a leaf out of his book. But then Tony Blair proved that you can be a Catholic and defy the Pope. It's easy if there's blood on your hands. And Joe Biden now has blood on his hands, just a couple of months after taking office. We'll be talking to Caleb Maupin, the sharpest of American political commentators, about that. And I'll be talking to you about the British political scene. Now, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, he wasn't terribly successful in the end, though he came very close to becoming the Prime Minister of Britain in 2017. But by 2019, the Brexit issue and others had brought him to his knees, and he was very convincingly defeated by Boris Johnson. And those that were trying to overthrow Jeremy Corbyn, and that was rather a lot of Labour members of Parliament, and for rather a long time, in fact, from the first day that he took office, always argued that anybody else but Jeremy Corbyn would be 20 points ahead of Boris Johnson. Well, there is a poll this week, a very big one, a very comprehensive one, with lots of subsets. But the big headline is that Sir Keith Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, is not 20 points ahead of Boris Johnson. In fact, he's 13 points behind Boris Johnson. A feat almost unimaginable, given that the British economy is in free fall and there's 135,000 dead people from the catastrophic lack of preparation and good order in the British response to that coronavirus. Any leader, let me paraphrase the Blairites, any leader would be 20 points ahead of Boris Johnson in those circumstances. Any leader apart from the one that they have got, Sir Keith Starmer. It must be dawning on two separate parts of the Labour Party. Let me deal with the biggest part first. It must be dawning on those who remain loyal to the Tony Blair gospel that Keith Starmer is a block of wood with a wig of rather fine hair, so wooden that the birds are nesting in him, so clunky that he cannot even take the knee without looking ridiculous. I just can't wait for his attempt to lay a wreath at the cenotaph. He'll approach the cenotaph like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. This man is a disaster, and the Blairites must now see it. I believe they do see it. In fact, I know that they do see it. So watch out, Sir Keith. Those that got rid of Corbyn and put you there are going to hoist you on your own petard, and they're going to replace you with an even truer keeper of the true Blair faith. And the other section of the Labour Party, those that remain loyal to the programme, at least, of Jeremy Corbyn, are going to have to face a brutal fact that if you thought Keith Starmer was bad, what is coming down the pipe is far, far worse. It'll be David Miliband who'll come back and who'll contest a by-election in the hope that he can get into Parliament, and before you could say Jack Robinson, Sir Keith will be gone, and David Miliband will be crowned as the prince over the water. Are you still going to stay in the Labour Party in those circumstances? What's wrong with you? Those of you who parrot this cry, don't hear it quite so much now. Parrot the cry of staying and fighting. Staying and first of all, what's the point of being in a political party when you've got to spend all your time and energy fighting other people in your own party? That sounds like a recipe for wasting your political life to me. But when you're doing it knowing that you haven't the slightest, the remotest possibility of ever winning that fight, then you are fooling yourself if you think you are standing up for the working class. One of the subsets of this latest poll is that amongst working class people, the Conservatives are precisely twice as popular as Labour amongst the working class. Just think about that for a moment. In Scotland, there have been another set of opinion polls. When I arrived back in Scotland, everyone said separatism was inevitable. The union was dead. Dissolve the union was everywhere. The SNP were on track to an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament, something that by design was meant to be impossible. The SNP were winning out of the park until I re-entered the country and re-entered politics in Scotland. I'm very happy to tell you that this day, the polls show that the SNP will have no majority at all, and the majority of people in two separate polls today want Britain to remain united. They want Scotland to remain within the United Kingdom. 55 to 45, we won the once-in-a-lifetime generation in 2014. If you include the don't knows, which broke 9 to 1 for remaining in the United Kingdom last time in 2014, we're back almost exactly at 55 to 45. In fact, we're at 56 to 44. So I'm a happy man, not just because Manchester United beat the league leaders, Manchester City. I'm happy because the tide has turned in Scotland. And I've had a little bit to do with that, I'm very proud to say. So we're taking calls on all of these matters in the course of the next 2 hours and 40 minutes. Here's my trusty young assistant, colleague, young James. Is it all pouring in? My goodness, it's all royal. Do you believe that Meghan and Harry have been victimized by the Queen? 1,538 of you have voted, and I haven't even finished speaking yet. A, yes, 14% of you believe that Meghan and Harry have been victimized by the Queen. No, say 58% of you. And another 28% of you denounce the pair as publicity hounds. 1,538 people have voted. You can vote now, and for the next, well, just a little less than 2 hours on my Twitter feed. Let me give you some of the social media response, which is coming in thick and fast. John says, quite frankly, I think the behaviour of Harry and Meghan throughout has been deplorable. She, like a previous American divorcee, thought she could marry into the royal family and change things to her liking, and then started spitting bile and spite when she couldn't. Then the dash for cash. Harsh, but probably true, John. Gary says, I'm just hoping, whatever is said, we can put them out of our media on a daily basis, but I doubt it. Frankly, the pair bore to the bone. And Jean says, give me a break. The only time I ever heard of them getting a hard time was when they were in the papers complaining about getting a hard time. And Paul says, they have not been victimized by the Queen. The Queen understands that to be a working royal, you must be apolitical. Meghan wanted to be royal and a political activist. You cannot be both. And Nadia says, I don't think they have been victimized by the Queen herself. I feel like it's an outdated system that Meghan found strange, and that never set well with Harry. She must have studied it, though, before marrying into it. Crystal says they just want to do anything to stay relevant and in the press. She knew what she was marrying into. They wanted to walk away. They are most certainly not victims. And Tim says they have created victim personas as their unique selling point. It's a bit pathetic, really. And Alan says, for a couple that wanted privacy, they are certainly courting lots of media attention in the United States. They had the chance for a quieter royal life by living in Canada. Remaining within the Commonwealth could have been the workable compromise for both sides. It's all about them. And James says, look, Harry isn't even a royal. He's a... Oh, no, I can't say that, James. That would be unkind. Amelia says, a pair of spoilt two-bit nothings who didn't get what they wanted. She's acting at taking on the Diana role. And Dan says, never heard of her before he got involved with her. She's not important, interesting, or relevant. Jonathan says, of course they have been victimized. They are getting a press kicking, and Meghan is being investigated, whilst racism, paedophilia, and abusive relationships in the royal family are tolerated and enabled. Now, Jonathan's got a point there. Why is there not more discussion about Prince Andrew and his failure to cooperate with the FBI? Isn't that rather a more important alleged offence? And Steve says, strange how Meghan sues a paper to protect the privacy of her own family, and yet Harry is quite happy for her to wash the dirty laundry of his own in this interview. His grandfather is 99, his grandmother 94. The man's a disgrace. And Sam says Harry and Meghan are a waste of space. They are being disrespectful to the Queen, especially as Prince Philip is currently in hospital. It's all me, me, me with them lately. I could go on and on and on, because I'm told that our printer has just broken under the pressure of the social media that's coming in. Let me take a 60-second break, and then it's the great Caleb Maupin.
Radio Sputnik.
Our world is full of mysteries. The lost city of Atlantis. Area 51. Who killed JFK? The clock on Dr. Ranjeet Brar's wall.
It's a conspiracy, man. We have a right to know.
Shut it, you nutter! The senseless made sensible. Only on the mother of all talk shows.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, if you are watching as well as listening to the show, as last week 490,000 of you did, that's quite a big audience, isn't it? Just viewers. 490,000 last week. That's despite the efforts of Mr. Algorithm, who's ever active. Then please, if you're watching on Facebook, share now with all of your contacts, all of your friends. You can watch on my Facebook. You can watch on RT's multiple Facebook pages. You can watch on my YouTube, on RT's multiple YouTube pages, or on Twitter, where yet again, for the 5th week in a row, a record number of people watched on their telephone. I say that as the man who never thought that 5G would catch on. Who's going to watch TV on their telephone? I distinctly remember saying. But for 5 weeks in a row, new records are being broken. You can also watch on my Telegram channel, and one day I'll remember the address of that. You can also watch, of course, on Twitch, as I now know, to my cost. A significant number of you are. Here's my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. t.me/George Galloway. Do follow me on Telegram. Do get onto Telegram, because if Algorithm continues at the rate he's going, that might be our last redoubt. That might be our Stalingrad. Now, Caleb Maupin is my colleague on RT America. I work there Monday to Friday, every evening, 7 p.m. London time. And I often catch his reports, which are stupendously well devised and delivered. I consider him the smartest of our American correspondents. And he joins me now with much to say on what exactly is going on in the US. Caleb, thanks for joining us. I know neither of us would normally care to talk about these matters, but the big transatlantic story this evening is Oprah Winfrey about to broadcast a story involving Prince Harry and Princess Meghan dishing the dirt on the British royal family. Is anyone in the United States interested in that?
Well, there certainly is an upsurge of interest across social media. I think our leaders in the United States are pretty good at distracting us, and the celebrity culture is a great way to take our minds off of the crisis here in the United States, a pandemic, mass unemployment, infrastructure failing, cultural polarization. But nothing like some good old celebrity gossip, something that Oprah Winfrey has been crafting and perfecting the art of for decades. I think people are very excited to see what will be said.
What a great pity. Let's focus back then on what you rightly say is far more important. One might have expected that the Democrats would hit the ground running, that the shape of a Democratic Party-led United States would already be hoving into view. They control both houses of the Congress and they hold the White House. They have untrammeled power. How are they doing with it?
They're doing absolutely nothing. It is kind of amazing. When Obama came into office, he came in swinging, ready to do a lot of things. When Trump came into office, he came in swinging, ready to do a lot of things. But the Biden administration has been pretty silent, pretty quiet, and pretty undramatic. Not many dramatic actions, not many swift moves. It seems like they're almost waiting to see what is going to happen and what they might do. There many suspect there are some kind of backroom negotiations taking place, because you'll remember it was a very broad coalition that Biden set up in order to defeat Donald Trump. In addition to the usual liberal folks that are aligned with the Democratic Party, you had a whole section of the neoconservatives rallying around John Bolton, who backed Joe Biden. Now, you have different factions and different alliances that have been made, and it's not exactly clear what direction the Biden administration will take. They took office on a platform of "we're not Trump," and other than that, what exactly is holding the coalition together? When it comes to international situations, there's not a clear agreement within the Biden camp. When it comes to domestic policy, there's very clear disagreement. I mean, we saw, Bernie Sanders just get shot down by the Democratic Party leadership when he pushed to raise the minimum wage. And it's not clear what the Biden administration is going to do. All the statements that we hear from Biden himself, from Vice President Kamala Harris, from the new Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, are all very, very bland, very, very mild, very, very quiet. It's not clear what they're going to do. Many suspect, though, when some kind of agreement is reached behind the scenes, we may see some very, very dramatic moves. But right now, the administration is looking rather meek.
Let's come back to the domestic and stick to the international for a moment. One of the very few pre-election promises made by Joe Biden was that he would take America back into the Iran nuclear deal. Last week, he killed in cold blood 22 Iranians in an act of collective punishment, a weird kind of collective punishment. He killed 22 people, Iranians, who were in Syria for a crime he says was committed by Iraqis supported by Iran in Iraq. So what he did was illegal. But just as important as being illegal, it was absolutely stupid, wasn't it? Because it represented the end of any hopes of rapprochement with Iran.
Indeed. I mean, look, the Iranians made huge concessions at the negotiating table to enact the JCPOA. I mean, at the negotiating table, they gave up their peaceful nuclear energy program almost entirely. They made other very big concessions. And then when Donald Trump took office, he ripped up the Iran nuclear deal. He then murdered Qasem Soleimani, who is like the national hero of Iran. And then on top of that, we saw the assassination of a very important Iranian nuclear scientist. And so Biden takes office and he says, OK, I'm open to renegotiating the Iran deal, but Iran needs to make some concessions. Well, Iran made huge concessions and then got stabbed in the back. So he expects them to come back to the table now and make even more concessions after everything that's gone on over the past 4 years. And now we see this strike, which I must say the rhetoric around this strike, this killing of Iranians in Syria is particularly shocking because, let's be real, the Iranians were in Syria to fight against terrorism. They were there to protect Christians from Daesh, to fight against al-Qaeda and al-Nusra, to protect the secular, the Syrian Arab Republic, the secular government that protects religious minorities. But if you listen to American media, you would think that these Iranians that were in the country with the permission of the internationally recognized government, you would think that they were terrorists when they were there as part of an anti-terrorist operation permitted by the government. Meanwhile, the U.S. forces in Syria have absolutely no permission to be in the country. They are clearly violating Syria's territorial integrity. They have no right to be there. Donald Trump said they were there to take the oil, and that's called theft generally. So everything around this we've heard in American media just completely gets things wrong.
Yes, you wonder if it's the stupidity of the news media or the venality of the news media. Sometimes I think it might even be the first rather than the second. But in the case of Saudi Arabia, Joe Biden said that he would be bypassing the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and dealing directly with his father, the king. The problem is the king is too old and too ill even actually to speak. He cannot be talking directly to Joe Biden because he can't talk directly to anybody. So I thought, well, maybe this is the beginning of a distinct breakdown in the very special relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Maybe they'll be punished for their crimes in Yemen. Maybe they'll have the weapons supplies cut off. Maybe the Crown Prince will be forced to pay for the murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi. But none of these things seems to be happening.
Indeed. Well, it's important to note that Saudi Arabia seems to be in a bit of transition, right? Because at this point, the world, and especially the United States, are not as dependent on them as they once were. With hydraulic fracking, the United States has quite a bit of domestic oil extraction that it can have. It's not completely dependent on the Saudis like they once were. And so Saudi Arabia, it's also being pointed out, and you can see this in documents from the Atlantic Council and from the Council on Foreign Relations, Saudi Arabia, with its murderous war in Yemen, is a huge public relations disaster for the United States of America. The United States goes around the world saying it loves democracy, it loves freedom, and it's backing a country that still chops people's heads off in public, that just recently legalized women driving, that is an unapologetic autocracy with a king who absolutely rules. So it seems like Biden would like to distance the United States from Saudi Arabia in the public eye. But you'll notice that when he talked about Saudi Arabia and their weapon supply, what he said was, he said, we will no longer be supplying Saudi Arabia with offensive weapons. But he said that they would continue to help Saudi Arabia, quote, defend itself, and they would be providing them with defensive weapons. What's the difference between an offensive gun and a defensive gun? I don't know the difference. This seems like some semantical wordplay from the administration. They're trying to rescue the image of the United States, but the reality is Saudi Arabia buys huge stockpiles of American-made weapons. They get satellite support in their war on Yemen. They have gotten the advising and the advisory support of Pentagon generals. And the United States is very, very close to Saudi Arabia. But, you know, let's be real. Jamal Khashoggi, he worked for the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, the billionaire owner of Amazon, one of the most rich and powerful men in the United States. And the killing of Jamal Khashoggi was very much an attack on the American establishment. It wasn't simply an attack on the Washington Post or on Jamal Khashoggi. It kind of symbolized Saudi Arabia kind of, you know, moving in its own direction and kind of disrespecting the United States. It was an affront to the American establishment. And as Saudi Arabia is in a state of crisis. The Crown Prince has carried out kind of a crackdown on corruption in the country. We've seen more centralization of authority. A lot of the members of the royal family who got away with all kinds of corrupt and nefarious activities have been told they have to cut it out as the country transitions. We continue to see the Crown Prince come out with these strange economic plans for changing the country involving flying cars and robots and all kinds of, crazy stuff. So Saudi Arabia is in a bit of a crisis. The United States is in a bit of an international embarrassment in the way it deals with Saudi Arabia. All of this is a narrow tightrope the Biden administration is trying to walk. But the reality is Saudi Arabia and the United States are still very, very close. As much as the theatrics and the accusations and the words are being exchanged, Saudi Arabia and the United States are closer than ever.
Now, let's go back to some of these extremely rich people. I learned this week extraordinary numbers from RT America that in the last 50 years, so from 1971 until now, the top 1% of earners in the United States are $800,000 a year better off, while the average wage earner in the United States in the same 50 years is $8,000 better off. In other words, the gulf between the richest and the average guy, woman in the street in the United States has exponentially increased. Have the Democrats any plans to tackle that? He asked, hopefully.
Well, this is a continuation of policies that have been enacted in the United States for decades and decades. I mean, you can go back to the 1970s. We have been seeing the infrastructure of this country falling apart. We've got many states around the country that are unpaving the roads because local municipalities cannot afford to maintain paved roads. They're pulling up the asphalt and pulverizing it. And where you used to have a paved road, you have a dirt road. We've got water treatment facilities that are not properly operating, and children drinking poisonous water in places like Flint, but many other parts of the country we have problems purifying our water. We saw in Texas, when you had the cold front, you saw the power grid of the state of Texas collapse, and millions of people left without electricity, and then their pipes froze, and it was just an infrastructural collapse. And the average Americans, the working class communities that are really the bulk of this country, have just seen their living standards decrease. They've seen the good paying industrial jobs eliminated. And all of this has just been escalated by the pandemic. You have to remember that Walmart, they are making out like bandits during the pandemic. Amazon is richer than ever because of this pandemic. But a lot of the small businesses, a lot of the communities throughout this country, they have just been devastated. And we're seeing kind of a warfare between the federal government and the Democrats that are talking about, keeping the lockdown going, and states like Texas and other states that are lifting the mask mandate and saying we need to just open up. And that is really a cry of desperation. The economy of so much of the middle American, bulk of American, communities is just so devastated amid this pandemic, plus decades and decades of privatizations and neoliberal economic reforms. And this is the crisis. This is the story of the United States. Young people stuck in a cycle of low-wage, short-term service sector jobs, living standards decreasing, a rise in opioid addiction, a rise in suicide, diseases of despair claiming lives. I mean, the United States is economically in quite a meltdown, despite the fact that we have the richest rich people of any country in the world. No one disputes that. The richest of the rich in America are the richest in the rich of the world. But average Americans have been seeing their living standards go down and down and down, and the pandemic has only exacerbated that.
If the 41 billionaires in America gave every American $4,000 in relief, stimulus, a check, $4,000, they would still be richer than they were at the beginning of this pandemic. Just think about that, Caleb.
Yes, I mean, there's no question about it. The absence of any economic discourse, the fact that every time Bernie Sanders gets up and talks about the need for maybe a national health service or Medicare for all, The response to him is people say, well, what about Stalin? I mean, that's just like Stalin. That's just like Pol Pot. That's just like Mao. I mean, the economic neoliberalism, the idea that we cannot possibly have the state intervene to take care of people economically, that we just have to have the government hands off, that's the American way, has been so ingrained in U.S. society over decades and decades and decades. The belief that any attempt by the state to fix up the economy is an evil Marxist-Leninist conspiracy, and that's what we fought against in the Cold War, blah, 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 has been so ingrained among the population that we've just seen monstrous economic policies that have just devastated the country. And the ultra-rich have gotten richer and richer and richer. But the very economic foundations of the country, the very infrastructure, is just falling apart as living standards decrease.
Extraordinary. Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, the $15 minimum wage, which would give the lowest paid workers $30,000 a year. For British people, that's, I don't know, 25 or 26,000 pounds a year. Is this now dead as a dodo?
Well, I think people will continue to raise it. It's something that's very important in the Democratic camp. There were many times that we saw the Democrats be able to increase voter turnout by actually putting minimum wage initiatives on the ballot and having low-income workers basically go to the polls to vote to increase their wages. And so I think in the Democratic camp, there will still be talk of it. But it's pretty clear, however, that among the Democratic leadership, there is an extreme amount of reluctance to push any reform of the minimum wage or raising of the minimum wage at a federal level. That's very, very clear. The Democratic leadership is not interested in taking a federal move. However, in local areas, in different states and municipalities, Democrats have learned it's a very good get out the vote mechanism. So I think we'll continue to see local minimum wage initiatives for the purpose of getting Democrats elected, not any federal moves anytime soon.
Caleb Maupin, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much obliged to you, sir. Do you believe Meghan and Harry have been victimized by the Queen? 13% of you do, but 58% of you don't. And moreover, 29% of you consider the pair to be publicity hounds. That's on Twitter. On the Telegram poll, on my Telegram channel, 12% of you, more or less the same, think they are being victimized. 53% of you think they are not. And 35% of you, even more on Telegram, consider them to be publicity hounds. This is the mother of all talk shows. Let me give you the phone number, because you need to get your calls in early, because so many people are disappointed every week. Here's the number if you're in the UK, 02077 982 255. And if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us at George Galloway, at RTUK News. Give me a 2-minute break, will you?
Radio Sputnik.
Call me. Come and have a go. If you think you're hard enough, don't bring up a false name. Come on air. Call me and let's have this matter out.
Let's get ready to rumble!
How have you got the nerve to tell people to Brexit if you're not telling them the repercussions?
That's 2016's argument, Michael. I'm no longer arguing with you about the merits of Brexit. I'm arguing with you about democracy, about the right of the majority to have their decision, their vote implemented.
This match will get red hot.
Not have a referendum. Let them have a referendum. Let them sort it out amongst themselves.
I want a referendum. Robert, I want a referendum. Let me put that in capital letters. If you think this year, which is shaping up already to be an annus miserabilis for the SNP, if you think this is your year, go ahead. Come on. Let's have it out.
It's on.
But no, George, it's not as simple as that, right? Have you seen the documentary about Cambridge Analytica and people who work there? Have you looked at the
I know
global
nothing about them. I'm not interested in them.
Precisely. But
I'm not
because you don't know about them.
I'm not interested in them, Bruce, because it's all a red herring. Just like Russiagate was a red herring.
You're up.
Do you only want to hear voices that agree with you? Because if you do, you're not clever enough to be at this open university of the airwaves. In fact, you need to go back to remedial and learn something about what democracy and freedom of speech actually mean.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
2,069 votes in so far. You've got about an hour to vote on the Meghan and Harry controversy. Not much change, actually, in the numbers that I gave you, in the balance of them anyway. I see the YouTube comments are quite lively tonight. I rarely read comments, but there's no comments section like a YouTube comments section, believe me. Jonathan, I've done him. Marek says, I wanted to wish them well, but I just knew she would be trouble. Harry was a good lad before he met her. Now he's under the thumb. He just does whatever she tells him. And Headley says they are publicity hounds, only in it for the money. But Teresa says, who gives a stuff about the royals? The sooner they're disbanded, the better. Say goodbye and give them a house in Castle Milk. Castle Milk's a fine place for the royals to end up in. Well said, Teresa. Now, there is no independent parliamentarian like my next guest. She is the epitome of an Irish independent parliamentarian. For quite some time, she was in the Irish Parliament itself, in the Dáil. Now she's in the European Parliament. And trust me, she is the only person worth watching in the European Parliament. Recently, she gave a round of the guns at the Russophobic, foaming at the mouth European parliamentarians and other ministers and in the Secretariat who are pushing always for more and more hostile policies towards Russia in the European Union. I had her on Sputnik just the other day, in which she explained in short order exactly what's going on. I'm glad to say she's now on the even bigger stage of the mother of all talk shows. Clare Daly, member of the European Parliament, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Now, Clare, just before we go on to the main burden of what we want you to talk about tonight, have you ever been in a parliament more dismal than the European Parliament?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I've only been in two parliaments, so I haven't much to judge from. But out of the two, yeah, it'd probably be worse, all right, than the Irish one. There's a huge disconnect from the European Parliament with the citizens of Europe, even worse than it is in a lot of national countries. So you're probably no, you're right.
It's just I was wondering how a bird of paradise like you could function amongst the mundane and the banal that are there, largely on extremely low turnouts of voters, second division, third division politicians. I feel for you. I really feel for you. But
well, look, flattery will get you everywhere, right? And thanks very much for all the compliments. But actually, it's a kind of a weird bunch that's there. I mean, it is a strange place. There's no doubt about it. Turnout is incredibly low in a lot of the countries. But actually, I mightn't agree with a lot of them, but some of them would be pretty capable. You have a lot of former ministers, prime ministers, army generals, combined with sort of ordinary activists as well. So it's very much a mixed bag. But sadly, like a lot of other parliaments, it's pretty disconnected from the people that it's supposed to represent, that's for sure.
Well, you certainly don't waste your time there. Every time I see you, you are lashing them for their political errors, and one of which I want to ask you about now. I don't quite understand the attitude of the European Union towards Russia. After all, Germany has just concluded, despite browbeating and belligerent bullying and even bribery from the United States, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So Germany and Russia are now inextricably linked, presumably forever, in the energy business. Russia is the biggest European country, Moscow the biggest European city, and yet all I hear out of the European political scene is hostility towards Russia. I don't quite understand it.
Well, I'm struggling to kind of deal with it myself, to be honest. I mean, there's no doubt about it, you're right. I mean, there's been an incredible escalation, I suppose, in what we'll call the new Cold War rhetoric, with European Union parliamentarians falling over themselves to be the most critical of Russia. We saw that recently in the visit of the High Representative Joseph Borrell to Moscow, where they were calling for his resignation because he had the audacity to go on a visit. But then on the other hand, you have a lot of EU member states doing business with Russia. So I suppose for me, the only thing that will explain it is it's hypocrisy. They're playing a bit of a game with the United States. They're sort of saying, oh yeah, Russia can be our bogeyman too. It's convenient to target Russia, particularly as they need to have a justification for the ever increasing amount of public money that is going on militarism, because it's only now in the recent budgets that for the first time the European Union is spending money directly on defence. That's a departure. At an inconvenient time when we should be spending money on health, that we're spending more on militarism. But, you know, if you're going to spend money on armies and so on, well, then you have to have an enemy. And certainly some of the Eastern European countries in particular and others have decided that Russia fits the bill. But, I mean, it's pretty pathetic, really.
Do they drive it? Do they drive it, Claire? Does Russia's near abroad, the former countries of the Warsaw Pact, are they driving this anti-Russian hostility?
They're certainly the most audible champions of it in many ways, but they don't carry enough clout for that on their own. I think it's a sort of desire to be the best Atlanticist, really. You know, it's to curry favour with the United States, it's to keep in the US's good books, and it's to respond to the call of the lobbyists who occupy, you know, the positions of power really in Brussels. They're the ones who call the shots. So they talk all the time about a security threat. We need to defend our borders, hybrid security, hybrid threats, foreign interference, all of these good stuff that they love talking about and that they actually engage in themselves. But they do that to justify the big contracts that big European money goes for. And the same companies that benefit from the arms contracts are the very ones that benefit from the border security and the surveillance contracts to keep refugees out when they do engage eventually in their wars to destabilise other parts of the globe.
Very interesting. Now, of course, the Russians don't need the European Union. Russia has a very powerful economy itself and, just as importantly, has the closest possible relations with China, which has very soon, maybe by the end of the night, will be the biggest economy in the world. And the Russian attitude has been, well, look, we actually don't want anything to do with the European Union. We'll deal directly with European countries. But if the European Union is going to be so vicious towards us, we don't want anything to do with them. Does that play into the barrow of the Russophobes in Europe, or does it make them maybe pause for thought?
Well, I'd like to think it would, but I think it would take more than that. I mean, interestingly, there's quite a lot of negative rhetoric also expressed towards the Chinese. But interestingly, in the last week or two, China became the EU's biggest trading partner, but it doesn't stop them coming up with a lot of anti-Chinese rhetoric as well. There's no doubt about it, business talks, and the governments of Europe are going to continue to do business with Russia. We see that with Germany in particular, who are the ones who call the shots. It's interesting that we hear a lot of talk from the European Commission about Russian disinformation around the vaccine, but yet European countries are queuing up to see can they get access to the Sputnik vaccine as well. So look, at the end of the day, there's a little bit of mouthing off going on here. It's regrettable because sadly these things can develop a life of their own, and it's very insulting really to the Russian people. When I did have the chance to speak out and try and have a little bit of balance in the conversation, I was really struck by the amount of Europeans from across so many different European countries and Irish people living in Russia and so on who said, thanks a million for trying to put a bit of balance here. And it just shows you how much the conversation is tilted, but it's not tilted in reality because, you know, as you say, a lot of the member states are doing business with Russia and Russia has said, look, we'll continue to do business with them. So as far as I'm concerned, it's the EU's loss, really. Russia doesn't need to worry about it unduly, and I'm sure it is.
There's rather a good Irish pub in Moscow, which, unlike the Irish pubs in Ireland, is open for business and doing a roaring trade. Finally, speaking of Ireland, Claire, you must be in despair at the performance of the new coalition government in Ireland, which seems to be making a mess of absolutely everything it touches.
It is shocking. I mean, it's really shocking. Like, they're kind of nearly beginning to make the European Union look good. Maybe not quite, but yeah, they've been a disaster. I mean, it's a coalition made up of the two historical right-wing parties with the Green Party thrown in for good measure, and they're making a holy show of themselves. They have made a disaster of COVID. The economy is shut down a year on, and yet meat plants are open. But yet children are not going to school. There's chaotic and contradictory health advice. The vaccine rollout is all over the shop. And they're an unmitigated disaster. I was in the Irish Parliament for 8 years, and I've never seen the likes of the carry-on that's there at the moment. And it's so hard for Irish people who've suffered so much in the course of the last year to see this shambles continuing. It's appalling.
You might need to go back there, Claire, and save them. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows, Clare Daly, independent Irish member of the European Parliament. Now, Dr. Ranjeet Brar will be on an hour earlier. He's on just after the 8 o'clock news because after 9, we've got the Right Honourable Norman Baker, the former Home Office Minister and former Lib Dem Member of Parliament. And as some of you know, he can't do earlier than 9 o'clock because he's got his own music radio show that he is doing right at this minute. So if you have any calls on the coronavirus issue, get them in right now, especially if you want Dr. Ranjeet to deal with them. Dr. Ranjeet Brar coming up right after the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has defended plans to give NHS staff in England a 1% pay rise amid warnings that nurses could quit. Johnson said the government is giving workers as much as we can in the tough times of the COVID pandemic. The rise, which is less than inflation, is being considered by an independent panel and would cover most hospital staff. Labour says the proposal goes against a government promise made last year to give NHS workers a 2.1% pay rise. Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth said Chancellor Rishi Sunak had been cowardly when he sneaked out the announcement a day after his budget. Nurses have described the proposed pay rise as insulting, with unions threatening strike action and warning what they call the pitiful rise may lead to staff quitting their jobs, worsening staffing issues in the health service. The Royal College of Nursing has reiterated its calls for the government to make a U-turn on the 1% offer and has set up a £35 million strike fund. The UK must prepare for a hard winter because the population immunity to respiratory viruses other than COVID could be lower than usual, one of England's top medics has said. Dr. Susan Hopkins said the NHS must be ready for surges in flu and other similar illnesses. It comes after England's first step towards easing lockdown, with all pupils returning to school tomorrow. Longer school days and shorter holidays are among the measures the government is considering to help pupils in England catch up on lost learning, the Education Secretary has said. Gavin Williamson said ministers were looking at how the school year runs after the disruption of COVID. He also said a 5-term year and changes to summer holidays were under consideration. The Scottish Conservatives say they will push for a vote of no confidence in SNP Minister John Swinney on Tuesday or Wednesday. Leader Douglas Ross said he also wanted to see a similar vote against First Minister Nicola Sturgeon unless further legal advice in the Alex Salmond case were released. The Scottish Government published legal advice related to its court battle with the former Deputy Minister Salmond this week. Deputy First Minister Swinney had previously argued such advice should remain confidential, but he then said he had taken the exceptional step to rebut alleged false allegations made about the Scottish Government's legal advice over the judicial review brought by Salmond. The move came after all opposition parties indicated they would back a motion of no confidence in Swinney last week if he did not comply, with the SNP government facing defeat if it goes ahead. Pope Francis is visiting parts of northern Iraq that were held by Islamic State militants on the third day of his historic trip to the country. Christians were among those targeted by IS when they seized the region in 2014, carrying out human rights abuses. The Pope prayed among ruined churches in Mosul, the former IS stronghold, before meeting Christians in Karakosh. He also celebrated Mass at a stadium in Erbil with thousands of people attending despite COVID concerns. Iraq, which has seen more than 13,500 deaths with COVID-19 and more than 726,000 cases, has recorded a sharp increase in infections over the past month. The 84-year-old leader of the Catholic Church and his entourage have all been vaccinated, but Iraq only received its first batch of doses last week. China's foreign minister says allegations his country is carrying out genocide against Muslim ethnic Uyghurs are ridiculously absurd and a complete lie. Wang Yi made the comments during his annual news conference today. A number of nations, including the US, have used the term to describe Chinese treatment of Uyghur people. China has been accused of carrying out forced sterilization on Uyghur women and separating children from their families. The United Nations says at least 1 million members of the Muslim minority are being held in the camps, which China says provide vocational training and are aimed at eradicating extremism. Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman jailed in Iran on spying charges, has had her ankle tag removed at the end of her 5-year sentence. However, her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, has been told a new court case against her is scheduled for next Sunday. The charity worker had been under house arrest in Tehran since being moved from jail last March. She's always denied the charges against her. The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, said she should be allowed to return to the UK. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex highly anticipated TV interview with Oprah Winfrey is set to air in the US later tonight. It marks the first sit-down interview with the couple since they quit their roles as senior working royals last year. In a clip released earlier this week, Meghan said it was really liberating to now feel able to speak for herself. The interview with Oprah Winfrey will air in the US on CBS and the UK on ITV at 9 p.m. tomorrow. It comes as Buckingham Palace is investigating claims the Duchess bullied royal staff at Kensington Palace. The report about allegations of bullying levelled at Meghan came after the interview with Oprah was recorded. Meghan has called it the latest attack on her character in 2 clips released earlier by CBS. Meghan said Buckingham Palace could not expect her and Prince Harry to be silent if it was perpetuating falsehoods about them, as she alleges, while Harry drew parallels between the treatment of his late mother. And finally, a group of teachers have filmed a parody video ahead of the return of students to their classrooms tomorrow. 4 teachers from the King's School in Rochester banded together for a lockdown version of the 1995 Take That hit Back for Good. It's sung by school principal Ben Charles, head of the prep school Tom Morgan, and Catherine Openshaw, headmistress of the nursery and pre-prep school. Chaplain Father Padfield also features in the video. The usual lyrics have been changed to reflect the current pandemic, with the group singing, and I'm going to say these, not sing them, "We'll be together, fingers crossed now for forever, we'll be fighting and forever we will be, so complete in our hope that we will never be locked down again." Let's see if the students take that to number 1 in the charts, but that is the latest. Here on Sputnik News, I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Do you believe that Meghan and Harry have been victimized by the Queen? Yes, no, or they're publicity hounds? You can vote for the next 55 minutes on my Twitter feed. Coming up after the 9 o'clock news is the Right Honourable Norman Baker, the author of, how shall I put it, a very sceptical view of the British royal family in his book, And What Do You Do? He'll be coming up after 9, which therefore explains why Moats medic Dr. Ranjeet Brar is with us an hour earlier. And you could tell it's an hour earlier because his clock is working and you can see it behind him. There are, for those who are new to this, there's a multiple set of conspiracy theories about the fact that Dr. Ranjeet's clock is sometimes not working and once was thought to have disappeared, but it turned out to be behind his head. Dr. Ranjeet, thank you for joining us. It's been another good week, at least in Britain, on the coronavirus front, hasn't it?
Good to be with you, George. Thank you. It's lovely that my clock is of such great interest. But yeah, it has been. We continue, I think, really to be on the road out of the pandemic in terms of numbers, hospitalizations. We've seen just over 40,000 test-proven cases this week, which is a figure which is, reduced tenfold over a 6-week period. Deaths are still present. We're still seeing people dying from coronavirus, but far fewer. That number is still 1,700 or slightly more than that over the past week. And again, hospitalizations, the number of people we're seeing who are in hospital with coronavirus has fallen to around 12,000, 12,500, which corresponds to about 12% of bed capacity, whereas at its peak, we were looking at 40% of our bed capacity. So yeah, not gone away, but very much on the retreat, and on the retreat overwhelmingly due to, yes, the lockdown, but even more than that, the vaccination campaign, where we're getting on to 1/3 of the population who have been vaccinated, and increasingly, 50-year-olds and even 40-year-olds and people with slight medical problems are being invited for vaccination, George.
Now, this is the first jab. I said to a rather eminent person on the phone the other night, I'm so old, I was vaccinated 3 weeks ago. And they said, I'm so old, I've had both my vaccinations. But the efficacy of just the one of the Pfizer has turned out to be astoundingly high, hasn't it?
It has, and essentially it seems that the initial studies published looked at a certain time frame. They looked at 3 weeks after the second vaccination, which is also essentially 6 weeks after the first vaccination. But actually, if you just have the first vaccination, you look over the 6, 8, 12 weeks, then actually your level of antibodies seem to continue to rise even with a single vaccination, such that, yes, we have seen in excess of probably 80% efficacy even with a single jab. So yeah, that was it seemed like a gamble at the time, but it's the one that has certainly paid off and is very good news for the number of people who've had coverage.
And how does that compare with the European Union? Because I ask because one of the key parts of Project Fear that was used against Brexit was that we would be marooned, running out of medicines, apart from the sky going to fall in, planes going to fall from the sky and all of that. But they particularly honed in on the fact that your old mother wouldn't be able to get her medicine and so on. That looks all very hollow now.
It does. The EU obviously has an enormous population, around 400 million. However, the last figures I saw seem to show that around only 5 to 6% of the population of the EU had been vaccinated, so quite a low figure. And they're still involved in various spats, just as they were very upset that there was a delay in AstraZeneca delivering them vaccine, and they threatened to retaliate. Really with trade embargo, trade measures, trade sanctions against the UK, saying that they were going to prevent the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine from being exported from Germany to us. They've had a recent similar spat with Australia, where first Italy and now France, it seems, also are likely to prevent promised doses of vaccine going from the EU to Australia, so putting a lot of strain on their relations over this question, and showing, as the Hungarian Prime Minister said many months ago, towards the beginning of this crisis, it shows you the extent of European solidarity, that when the heat is on, it's every man for themselves. Yeah. And the idea of Europe or the EU being some happy family has been really put to the test by this situation. And we know, for example, again, Hungary, Czech Republic, other countries have been seeking urgently, and some of them have, in fact, given an emergency license to get the Russian Sputnik vaccine, whereas the EU overall still has not done so. Though it did make some noises that it might.
Britain has vaccinated a greater percentage of our population than Germany, France, Italy, and Spain put together. That's a pretty remarkable statistic.
Yeah, it is. I think we've got an excess number of doses in terms of those that we bought as we get towards vaccinating the vulnerable population. Really, I do think there's going to be a question as to whether the vaccination program needs to continue. We have done well, but there will be a large number of people from the relatively, less vulnerable population who still don't really want to take the vaccine. It was open to question whether we need to vaccinate children. My personal view is that people under 18 probably don't need to take the vaccine. I haven't seen final plans as to whether they offered it. And people, of course, who've had the coronavirus wonder whether or not they need to take it. There's no harm in taking it, but equally they get equal protection just from having had the coronavirus itself. But yeah, so essentially our program has gone well, and I do feel like over the next couple of months we should be looking at the end of this pandemic effectively for the population here, George.
Now, we've done very well on vaccination, but we did catastrophically badly in the pre-vaccination period, and we seem to have snatched defeat from the jaws of victory when it comes to how we treat the workers in the National Health Service. It doesn't seem that long ago that everyone was out clapping them on a Thursday evening, but the government have just clapped them in the face by offering them a 1% wage increase. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I entirely agree, George. It seems not only counterintuitive, but it's an insult, particularly to the whole of the medical profession. Actually, nurses, doctors, physiotherapists, radiographers, occupational therapists, all of the NHS employees. Of course, so many of our NHS staff, in terms of cooks, in terms of cleaners, in terms of ground staff, are in fact already privatized out and subcontracted, so that there's a huge number of people who work in our hospitals who aren't, NHS employees and won't get any pay rise. But those who are direct core employees, and even an increasing number of those, are bank staff of various kinds. But yes, to have such a low pay rise when we know that wages are at a historic low. Actually, if you look at, I was involved in 2016 in the junior doctors contract dispute. The new contract did go through in the end, and that was essentially a 40% pay cut for doctors. That's what it meant, as well as a decrease in their ability to whistleblow, a decrease in their employment terms, and many doctors left the profession over that. Nurses, of course, have a considerably lower income. And they've not been isolated, but several documented instances of nurses whose wages are so low that they're really struggling to commute into work, get home to work, and feed their families on their wage. Having to visit food banks. These are not spurious accounts. These are documented accounts. So that we have an incredibly hard-working part of our population who give such a key service that we're all dependent on. We've witnessed the importance of their work, witnessed it afresh and anew throughout this pandemic, and then to offer them what is effectively a pay cut is frankly disgusting, George, and it's widely felt to be so, I think, throughout the British population, and particularly throughout the working class population of Britain.
Now, Maureen in Texas is on the line for you, Doctor. Let's hear what she wants to ask. Maureen, welcome to the show. Maureen?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Maureen. The doctor's waiting.
Yes, hello. I'm calling from Texas, and I have a question about the Moderna vaccine.
Yeah, go
I am
ahead.
a healthcare provider. I am a healthcare provider, and I work with COVID patients, and I received the first dose of the vaccine at the end of December. However, my employer refused to give me the second dose, and I've been unable to locate a place to get it on my own. And is there any data as far as if I'm given any protection by just one single dose, and if I am able to locate a place willing to give me the vaccine, should I just start over as if I was not vaccinated at all, or just get the second one as I should have?
Good question. Good question, Maureen in Texas. Doctor, do you know the answer?
Well, thanks, Maureen, and I really totally understand your concern. So particularly when there was the question here in this country, we haven't had the Moderna virus vaccine. We've had the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer-BioNTech. The Pfizer-BioNTech and the Moderna work on a similar technology, and I would suspect that they're likely to behave in similar ways, and therefore I suspect that you're likely to get substantial immunity even from a single dose. But the companies, haven't fully, either of those companies with the mRNA viruses vaccines have not fully published all of their data. We are going on the first interim analyses of their randomized controlled trials, and neither company have accepted the recommendation for a single dose, even in the face now quite a lot of evidence in the case of Pfizer-BioNTech that in fact it is effective. So I understand your concern. I think you are likely to have a fair degree of protection, particularly as time continues, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. You'll have a considerable amount of protection. I haven't seen any studies relating to that particular company and that particular vaccine on a single-dose protocol. And if you can get the second dose, then absolutely, I would go ahead and try and secure it.
Maureen, why are they refusing to give you the second one?
It was a situation where I was a contract employee, and because my contract ended the very week that it was due, they abruptly refused to give it to me, saying that they were reserving it for their regular full-time employees.
Seems extraordinarily mean. Maureen, thanks. I hope the answer gave you some solace, some comfort. Let's go to Stuart in Halifax. Go ahead, Stuart.
Good evening, George. Good evening, Doctor. My question is, I've already had the first of the AstraZeneca vaccines. I have MS, multiple sclerosis, and I've had a relapse with my multiple sclerosis since I've had the vaccine. It's been 2 weeks now, and I've had 10 days of relapse. My question for you, Dr. Ranjeet, was, would you still advise me to have the second jab, bearing in mind that I've had a considerable relapse from the first one?
Wow, that's a big question, Stuart. Doctor, do you want to have a try at answering that?
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that you've obviously had the relapse. How often is it relapsing and remitting your MS?
That's what I was initially diagnosed with, but I am in the process of having further diagnosis because they can't quite put the finger on which category that I'm in. Of course,
I totally understand. So I can only, you have a real sympathy. I'm so sorry you had this relapse. It's a very difficult condition, unpredictable condition to live with. And I'm not a neurologist. I don't want to give you specialist advice in your field of neurology. I haven't seen any document or any indication, and I've looked at the kind of the yellow card reporting data for the vaccines that we're using in England, and I haven't seen any relationship put forward between the vaccine and MS, or relapsing or a relapse of MS, of multiple sclerosis. Yeah. So it's something that I don't know the answer to. I don't know if anyone would know the answer to. I think there's no proven relationship based on the data that is available. And I personally don't think it would be a reason not to have the second dose. I would tend to go ahead and have the second dose, but I would probably, in your instance, ask the advice of your specialist, your neurologist, whether they have any further insight or opinion on that before you go ahead and do so.
Quite important, Stuart, I think, that you do that because obviously we don't know you, we can't see you, the doctor can't give out advice in a field that isn't his. So it is quite important that you consult your neurologist. Last word to you, Stuart.
I've spoken to my MS nurse, and a few of her patients, I have a specialist nurse, a few of her patients are reporting relapses after having both Pfizer or the AstraZeneca vaccine. Thankfully, most of them are short-lived and are resolving. So, the little bit of advice I've had so far was what prompted my call to yourselves. And just a bit of an insight for anybody else who might be suffering as well if they are having something after the jab, that, yes, to speak to the specialists. I've not spoken to my neurosurgeons yet. I've got two of those. I have one, a private one and a public one. The private one, again, something that I would want to discuss with yourselves was the benefits of the medical cannabis registry, which I am on at the moment, and that does seem to be having an impact, and I think maybe something that we need to speak about a little bit more going forward. There is a big push to treat people with medicinal cannabis for certain disorders. So thank you very much. I promise you, Stuart, we will come back to that, and I really hope that your health picks up and that this is only a short-term relapse that you are suffering. Thanks very much indeed for that call. Thank you, Doctor, as always, for helping us through the latest stage in this very, very long and difficult saga. Much obliged to you, Dr. Ranjeet Brar. The poll is doing great numbers. 2,490 people have voted. You've still got about half an hour to get your vote in on my Twitter feed. 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Peach of Express Woking. What is it you want? Oh, you want an ill-advised interview on the BBC? A cheese pizza, extra immature, and a raw bailout. No, we don't take taxpayers' money. Yeah, but we do take contactless. Would you like a receipt for that, Mr. Prince?
Mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, this is where I look back and occasionally askance at 7 momentous days in our history. This is the week. This was the day in 1965 when state troopers and volunteer officers attacked black and white protesters in Selma, Alabama, injuring at least 50 people. They waded into a group of about 500 demonstrators using tear gas, whips and sticks after Governor George Wallace, remember him, ordered the planned march from Selma to the state capital, Montgomery, to be halted on the grounds of public safety. The violent scenes in Selma left 17 people in hospital and came to be known as Bloody Sunday. Yes, another Bloody Sunday. Civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King then organized another march there 2 days later. His group knelt and prayed in front of the state troopers who stopped them at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but did not attack them, presumably because the whole world was watching. President Lyndon B. Johnson finally signed a new Voting Rights Act almost 6 months later in August 1965 that banned discrimination in voting practices and procedures on the grounds of race or colour. That'll be great when it finally comes in. In 1969, Golda Meir, the so-called grand old woman of Israeli politics, was elected as the first female Prime Minister of Israel. She was 70. Now, I'm not yet 70, so maybe there's hope for me yet. Now, in this week, in 1956, Britain ordered the deportation of the Greek Cypriot leader, Archbishop Makarios, in the forlorn hope of restoring law and order to the Crown Colony. The Archbishop was arrested when he arrived at Nicosia Airport to board an airliner for Athens. Pardon me, after refusing to denounce the use of violence. Britain accused him of, quote, actively fostering terrorism. He was deported to the Seychelles. Now, if you're going to be deported, then the Seychelles isn't a bad place to be deported to. The following day, though, riots broke out in Cyprus. The United States and Greece condemned the British government's decision. And there were even objections from the Labour Party. And no, I'm not making that up. You certainly wouldn't get that today from the present lot. Makarios was allowed to return to Cyprus when he finally gave up hope of enosis, or unification with Greece. He received a tumultuous welcome when he returned in 1959. And later that year, he became president. And in 1960, Cyprus became independent. Joseph Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, requested political asylum at the United States Embassy in India in 1967. She later denounced her father eventually becoming a US citizen. Well, it's kind of conditionality. Wrote a book and then disappeared into well-deserved obscurity. In 1969, James Earl Ray was jailed for 99 years by a court in Memphis, Tennessee, after admitting he carried out the murder of the American civil rights leader, the aforementioned Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. His guilty plea was made on the understanding that he was spared the electric chair. It also brought a swift end to the trial. 3 days after his jailing, though, Ray recanted his guilty plea. He claimed he'd been set up by a gun dealer in Montreal, known only as Raoul. As you do, he spent the next 29 years fighting for the trial that his own guilty plea had forestalled, and he won the support of the King family. Ray died in April 1998. Now, if you believe that James L. Ray was the only lone gunman involved in the murder of Martin Luther King, I have a rather fine bridge here in London that I could sell you. A court in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, imposed a sentence of death on the Observer journalist Farzad Bazoft in 1990. He was convicted of spying for Israel while working on a story about an explosion at a weapons complex 30 miles south of the capital. International appeals for clemency fell on deaf ears, and Bazoft was hanged on the 15th of March, 1990. There was a new man in charge at the Kremlin this week. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev took over barely 24 hours after the death of Konstantin Chernenko. The speed of naming of his successor at 54, the youngest man to take over as General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, took people by surprise. Gorbachev radically changed the course of Soviet foreign policy, signing a number of agreements with the United States on nuclear disarmament. He introduced a policy of openness or glasnost, and he was also the architect of perestroika, or deep political and economic reforms. But his reforms led to severe economic hardship at home. Growing nationalist movements, spearheaded by the Baltic states, led him to propose a loose federation of Soviet states, and this proved the last straw for his opponents. In August 1991, he survived a coup attempt, largely thanks to the support of the Russian authorities, under the then leadership of Boris Yeltsin, who was just sober enough to climb onto a tank for the cameras. One of the most influential men of all time died in 1955, and he was a Scotsman, Alexander Fleming, who discovered the life-saving drug penicillin purely by accident. He had been on holiday and returned to his laboratory to discover mold on one of the experimental dishes on which he had been culturing bacteria. Rather than washing the dish, he noticed that the mold had killed the bacteria surrounding it. What at first he called mold juice became penicillin. The discovery of penicillin transformed the world of medicine. It was the first antibiotic drug. Without it, many illnesses would be incurable and life expectancy would be lower. Now, no one can be accurate about it, but medical scientists estimate that this fortunate mistake by Alexander Fleming, the Scotsman, may have saved 200 million lives since. 191 people died and at least 1,800 were injured as huge explosions tore through 3 Madrid train stations during a morning rush hour this week in 2004. The Spanish government of the time pretended that the Basque group ETA were the prime suspects, although they knew differently. The day after the blasts, an Arabic tape with Quranic quotes was found in a suspect van near Madrid. At least one group claiming links to Al-Qaeda said it planted the bombs. This was the week in 1984 that tens of thousands of Britain's miners stopped work in what became a year-long battle against job losses. The strike only began to crumble when the National Coal Board offered miners various pay incentives to return to work before Christmas. I have been an honorary member of the National Union of Mine Workers since 1982, and that Mine Workers Union card is one of my proudest possessions. On a happier note, pun intended, the Beatle Paul McCartney married Linda Eastman in a civil ceremony in London in 1969. Hundreds of people gathered outside the Marylebone Registry Office to catch a glimpse of the couple as they arrived with Eastman's 6-year-old daughter, Heather, from a previous marriage. Linda died of breast cancer in 1998 at the McCartney Ranch in Tucson, Arizona. McCartney is still churning out the music and still getting married at the Marylebone Registry Office. I know that because I saw his marriage on the steps of the Marylebone Registry Office. The wife that he is still married to, at least I hope so. And finally, on the 13th of March in 1996, my goodness, Thomas Hamilton scraped ice off the window of his van before setting off indiscriminately to murder children at a primary school in Dunblane in Scotland. He sprayed shots at random around the school gym in an attack that lasted just 3 minutes, but caused carnage in a class of 5- and 6-year-olds. When he stopped firing, 16 children and their teacher were dead, and 15 more children were wounded. He then turned the gun on himself. Andy Murray, who grew up to be the champion tennis player, was in the next class scheduled to go into the gym. He sheltered throughout in the headmaster's office. Hamilton had licenses for 6 guns, leading to criticism of the police for not questioning what he used them for. A massive campaign was launched after the Dunblane massacre for tighter gun controls. The Snowdrop campaign was successful in achieving a change in the law in 1997, making it illegal to buy or possess a handgun. That's in Britain, of course. In the United States, rather different laws apply. It's a somber and shocking coda to this 7 days in our history. That was the week. That was. Now, let's go to the lines. Lots of calls lined up. Sarkar is in Glasgow. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Hi, George. Good evening. How are you keeping?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Thank you, George. First of all the best for the Scottish elections, and I'm very happy to see how you've been promoting the tactical voting and the constituency voting. I really appreciate that, George.
Thank you.
George, small question basically. Labour Party under Keir Starmer was supposedly going in a new direction because everything which went wrong in Labour was put down on Jeremy Corbyn. Supposedly the man was everything which was the reason because Labour lost. They said that Britain cannot be having a left-wing leader. Okay, here comes Keir Starmer. He's behind 15 points or 20 points out in the opinion polling. I don't see him coming up with any new ideas. I personally don't know what he stands for. And nowadays the left, or the so-called champions of the working class, are more interested in identity politics, whether fireman Sam should be of this gender, potato head should be of that gender. When will we have a true champion who knows how to talk for the people, like a Barbara Castle or a Tony Benn? That's my question, George.
It's a brilliant question. The Labour Party's leader is a block of wood. No ideas will be forthcoming from him. And I think that moves will begin shortly to remove him. The skids are under him, but they are profoundly under the party as a whole. You cannot successfully compete for power in a country where a very large number of the people in that country believe that you hate them, that you hate the way they live, the way they think, the way they talk, and the kind of ways in which they want to live their lives, their cultural norms, their belief in family, their belief that men are men and women are women, their belief in their flag, in their armed forces. If you are a party that seems and goes out of its way to seem to hate all these things, well, by definition, you're hating the people who believe in those things, and they're not going to vote for you. Now, Labour has been on that course for a very long time. It reached its apogee over the Brexit issue, where, notwithstanding that the clear majority had voted for Brexit, Labour lent itself to withering fire on the people who had thus voted and called them all kinds of nasty names and acted as if they were something distasteful that the cat had dragged in. The Labour front bench spokesman, who just 2 weeks ago suggested that we should drop Mr., Mrs., Miss in favour of MX and MY. This kind of madness, this kind of identity politics madness has done for the Labour Party amongst working class people. And you'll have heard me say earlier, in the latest opinion poll that puts Labour 13 points behind Boris Johnson, amongst working class people, it was 2-1, double the number of people supported the Tories as supported Labour. This is fatal, this is terminal, and rightly so, because the truth is Labour's obsession with race, with sexual identity, with gender, with identity politics of all kinds. These people are obsessed by these things for a reason, not just because they are overwhelmingly university educated, middle class, student union political types, but because the more you talk about these things, the less you have to talk about the big things, the things that really matter. Who, whom, who owns Britain, for who exercises power in this country, about class, about the vast gulf in earnings and wealth in this country. These are the things Labour doesn't want to talk about. So it talks about other things instead. It talks about whether Potato Head should be called Mr. Potato Head, even though, by the way, there's a Mrs. Potato Head. She must be very confused that her husband can no longer be called Mr. Potato Head. That obsesses about whether Fireman Sam is too white, too pale, too male, too straight to be allowed to be played with by our children and watched on the children's television channels. This kind of liberal identity politics madness, which began in the United States, but which came here at least 40 years ago, and I saw it happening in front of my eyes as a Labour figure at that time, as a Labour member of Parliament at that time. I saw it happen, slice by slice by slice. And the so-called left in the Labour Party are the biggest culprits. And now this is where it has all ended. What Britain needs and what America needs is a party that will allow people to live the lives they want to lead, to call each other Mr. and Mrs. if they choose to call people their wife or their husband if they choose to leave issues that will divide the working class at the door and concentrate on uniting the working class. That's the politics I believe in. I also happen to believe it's the politics that will repay in terms of votes and electoral and political support. I'm supremely uninterested in people's sexual orientations or what gender they think they are. Each to their own. If you turn up in a cocktail dress but with a beard and tell me you're a woman, I'll give you a hug and a kiss and call you madam. I don't care about your outward persona. I don't care about your inner angst. I care about your relationship to wealth and power. I'm ready to stand with you as a worker. Whatever you're wearing, whatever colour you are, however you pray, wherever you came from. Do you get me, Sarkar? That's the politics. Not only that I believe in, but it's the politics that we try to practice. And I believe it's the politics of the future. People are sick of being called ists and obes and insulted as racist, sexist, misogynist, transphobic, and all the other epithets that are hurled at people. We care nothing for these things. We believe the world is divided between the have-nots and the have-yots. And it's about time the have-nots got together to take their share. Here's Fred the Red in Buxton. Go ahead, Fred. Nice
Hello,
name.
George.
Nice name.
Yeah, and a fine result in Manchester.
Oh, dear. I was not expecting it, Fred. Were you?
No, I was terrified but elated at the final whistle.
Fantastic. Shaw was the man of the match for me.
Absolutely unbelievable. Best fullback in Europe, I think.
Yeah, and it's not the first time I've said he's the man of the match. He's having a fantastic season.
Anyway,
Really,
George,
go ahead.
I think I'm hard enough, so I've come to have a little go.
Okay, go ahead.
The tin-foil hat-wearing internet researchers that you keep having a go at. Yeah?
Yes.
Well,
I'm warming up, Fred.
Well, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that have become conspiracy facts due to the internet.
Well, I spoke about one of them earlier about James L. Ray and the mother of Dr. King.
But I'd just reel off a couple of biggies.
Yeah.
MK Ultra.
Remind us what that is.
LSD pumped into New York undergrounds by the CIA.
Wow.
Read up on it, George. It's a fact.
No, I have heard it. Yeah, nothing the CIA could do would surprise me, Fred. It's not that I don't believe there are conspiracies in the world. There are myriad conspiracies in the world.
And
it just doesn't mean that everything is therefore a conspiracy.
No, absolutely.
I was 30 years.
You have to be selective.
Yeah, Fred, I was 30 years.
I'd also say that, working people don't have the time that you have to research things, and the internet is very convenient, very fast.
I wish I had a lot of time. Fred, I was just going to say, I spent nearly 30 years sitting in the building along the road there. I know that a lot of things are cock-ups, not conspiracies, because we're ruled by Austin Powers, not by James Bonds. Go ahead.
I get that, but where would Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett, Robert Fisk be without the internet?
I'm not against the internet, Fred. I don't know where you got the idea I was against the internet.
Well, no, I know you're not against the internet, but it's people that research on the internet that you on occasion call tin-foil hat wearers. Yeah, and I get that.
Only if what they then come out with is worthy of that nomenclature. Not everything that's researched on the internet is, of course, crazy. Of course it isn't.
No, but it's a very convenient way for ordinary people to get information. Sure. And you have to be selective, I'll give you that, but, don't write them all off as tinfoil hat wearers.
No, I don't, but if they come out with nonsense, I have a duty to call it nonsense. Whether they got it from a book
quite true, and that's why I admire you, George, because you're a straight talker.
Off the internet. It's just, I think I now know what you mean. When people call me up and say, I've been doing my research, and it turns out that they've looked on the internet, not everybody who says that is nuts, but everybody who is nuts does say that.
Yes, I'll give you that one.
Okay. Fred, there was no need to be hard. We're friends. We even support the same football team. Last word to you.
Looking very dapper tonight, George. Thanks for the chance to have a chat with you.
My wife turns me out well. Thanks very much, Fred. The Red in Buxton. Let me take a quick break.
Well, how did I do?
I'm sorry, Prime Minister. At no point did you drive on the left-hand side of the road, and instead of driving us forward, you made several U-turns. We haven't gone anywhere.
Well, I think you'll find if you turn backwards enough times, eventually you'll go forward. So, did I pass?
No, you failed miserably.
But my teacher said I'd get much higher grades.
Better luck next time.
This doesn't happen to people like me. You leave me no choice.
I'm sorry, but rules are rules, even for Prime Ministers. What on earth is that?
My mutant pet.
Dominic Cummings?
No. Big algorithm. Get it?
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, I think the poll is about to close, so I should tell you that only 13% of you think that Meghan and Harry, who turn out to be a duke and a duchess, actually, I'm reliably informed and corrected, rather than the princess that I called her earlier. She ain't no princess, Gov. Anyway, do you believe Meghan and Harry have been victimised by the Queen? Only 13% of you say yes, 59% of you say no, and a further 28% of you denounce the pair as publicity hounds. Almost 3,000 people voted in that poll. You've got a few minutes left, I think, but only a very few. Now, some social media, because I'm not doing justice to the social media people. Daphne says, Harry carries within him the experience of his mother's final few years, so it's inevitable that he would wish to remove his family from that anxiety. The public loves salacious gossip, so why shouldn't the couple take advantage of that via the sympathetic ear of Oprah? I hear a band playing, Daphne. Prince William, of course, he had a mother, also the same mother, and the same experience of the last few years. But I saw him on television recently in a programme I wouldn't normally have watched. I trust me, I'm not remotely interested in royals. But Prince William was on with some football people talking about depression amongst men. And he enormously impressed me, I must say. Not just with his sympathetic ear, but with his gift for finding the right words and the right encouragement to people, men, who are suffering, usually in silence, from depression. And as someone who doesn't care about royals and has never been depressed, I stayed with that programme throughout its entirety. And so that's a tribute to his ability. Grace says, I wonder how much the interview is worth to the sympathetic Oprah. Yes, a very good point, Grace. If they're getting 10 million for it, imagine how much she's making. And Marie says, got to wonder how their two children will end up. These two are insufferable. And Steve says, Meghan thought she would be a Hollywood princess, got shocked when it involved work, and the press were interested in her past, interested in how she cut people who couldn't further her career out of her life, and then suddenly she wanted privacy. And Gideon says, I can't think what has possessed Harry to squander the huge goodwill and positive sentiment felt by most of us towards him. I hope in the end he feels the filthy lucre was worth it. The light I kept in the window for Harry and Meghan is now to be extinguished. I doubt if he's doing it for the money. She might well be. I don't think that it's money for him. I think he has fallen under her spell. I'm sorry if that sounds sexist, but I have known men that have been so infatuated, besotted by their glamorous partners that they ended up being led by the nose by that partner. Now, that may be completely off-beam, but I don't think Harry is doing it for the money. I think he's doing it for the love of Meghan. And I also have perhaps a mean suspicion that some way down the road he'll realise that and regret it. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, what do I know? Peter is in London and he's on the line. Go ahead, Peter.
Hello, George. Enjoying your programme very much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say at the opening there, where you said Labour Party members should leave the party.
Yeah.
Basically, I fundamentally disagree with what you're saying there.
Go ahead then.
Well, I think in our system where you have first past the post, inevitably we're going to have two large parties, which are both going to be broad church. And if you're on the left in any way, you need to be on the left party, and that's where the fight has to take place.
But you already had that fight and won it, Peter, and now you've lost it, and you'll never win it again.
Well, that's what you think, George. But
no, that's what Keir Starmer thinks. They've changed the rules so that you can never win it again.
Well,
don't you see?
He may have changed the rules for now, but we changed the rules before. Things can change, and if you're going to be realistic about getting power in this country, as it is at the moment...
But how much better can you do, Peter, than having Jeremy Corbyn as your leader? And
well, you can't, really.
Having a left... Well, but it didn't work.
Well, it didn't work. It was a great opportunity. He brought hundreds of thousands of people into the party. And
where are they then? Starmer won the election out the park.
Well, a lot of people voted on the left, voted for Starmer.
Well, how left can they have been, Peter?
Well, they were left, but they believed that he would bring the party together. He made loads of pledges.
So they're idiots then?
No, they're not idiots. They're genuine people who wanted to see a change and wanted to see the Labour Party democratised. And unfortunately, they feel let down by Keir Starmer and they've left. But some of them have stayed, and we're still there, and we're still fighting.
When you say fighting, you mean you're fighting against other people in your own party?
Well, yeah, to be brutally honest, that is going on, yes, of course.
So,
yes.
When do you get round to starting fighting for socialism against the Tories and amongst the public?
Well, that goes on at the same time. We argue our points locally, but it's a very, very difficult time at the moment.
That isn't true, Peter, is it? Because if Starmer imposes, as he has imposed, highly centralised control, now that he completely controls the whole show, you'll be going out, for example, in London, urging people to vote not for socialism, but for Sadiq Khan.
Well, we have to argue for that, yes, at the moment.
Yeah,
I mean,
how is that fighting for socialism?
Well, you've got to take the long picture. I mean,
but how long? Are you going to live 200 years? Peter, you're going to spend the rest of your life arguing for people to vote for a series of men and women that hate you, that would rather you left, and who stand for quite different things to what you stand for.
Well, I think as I say, it's a broad church, and to me, it's about.
How broad is it, Peter? There's never going to be. There's no left people going to be allowed to be candidates. There's no left policies going to be allowed to be fought for.
Okay, George. Well, at the moment, it's not a good time. I completely agree.
So how bad does it need to get before you say, actually, this is to hell with this for a game of soldiers?
Well, I look at it realistically, and I see where the power lies in this country. You formed another party, which I think is that's a good thing, but you'll only have power in this system if you take a lot of members with you, and
the big unions. I'm not in it for the power, Peter. I'm not in it for the power, but
No,
I
not
don't
for
have
yourself.
to. I don't have to wake up in the morning and fight somebody else in my own party for the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades until I'm dead. That is, I promise you, much better for your soul. Now, here's my last point, because I need to go to the news in a minute. My last question to you is this. You are in a party that has kicked out your former leader. He was 12 months ago the leader. Now he's kicked out. But you're staying in?
I'm there for the moment. He's still in the party. He's had the whip removed. That fight hasn't been finished.
Well, he's not
yet.
a Labour
It still goes
MP.
on.
He's not a Labour MP.
No, he's not a Labour
let's
MP,
not
but he's still in the
confuse
party.
people. The leader of the Labour Party, a year ago, is now not a Labour MP. How much worse does it need to get, Peter?
Well, you can only fight it inside. You can't fight it outside.
What, forever? In all circumstances?
None of us here forever, George.
Is it a religion?
No, it's not a religion. But I look at the system we have, and this is where the fight is, in the Labour Party. It's not. They won't have you back, unfortunately. I know that, but...
Not only wouldn't they, but I would sooner gouge out my eyes here in front of the audience with a teaspoon than join the Labour Party. Trust me, there would be a murder, Peter, if I went back into the Labour Party. Anyway, it's been a pleasure disagreeing with you. Thanks very much for the call. Here's the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has defended plans to give NHS staff in England a 1% pay rise amid warnings that nurses could quit. Johnson said the government is giving workers as much as we can in the tough times of the COVID pandemic. The rise, which is less than inflation, is being considered by an independent panel and would cover most hospital staff. Labour says the proposal goes against a government promise made last year to give NHS workers a 2.1% pay rise. Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth said Chancellor Rishi Sunak had been cowardly when he sneaked out the announcement a day after his budget. Nurses have described the proposed pay rise as insulting, with unions threatening strike action and warning what they call the pitiful rise may lead to staff quitting their jobs, worsening staffing issues in the health service. The Royal College of Nursing has reiterated its calls for the government to make a U-turn on the 1% offer and has set up a £35 million strike fund. The UK must prepare for a hard winter because the population immunity to respiratory viruses other than COVID could be lower than usual, one of England's top medics has said. Dr. Susan Hopkins said the NHS must be ready for surges in flu and other similar illnesses. It comes after England's first step towards easing lockdown, with all pupils returning to school tomorrow. Longer school days and shorter holidays are among the measures the government is considering to help pupils in England catch up on lost learning, the Education Secretary has said. Gavin Williamson said ministers were looking at how the school year runs after the disruption of COVID. He also said a 5-term year and changes to summer holidays were under consideration. The Scottish Conservatives say they will push for a vote of no confidence in SNP Minister John Swinney on Tuesday or Wednesday. Leader Douglas Ross said he also wanted to see a similar vote against First Minister Nicola Sturgeon unless further legal advice in the Alex Salmond case were released. The Scottish Government published legal advice related to its court battle with the former Deputy Minister Salmond this week. Deputy First Minister Swinney had previously argued such advice should remain confidential, but he then said he had taken the exceptional step to rebut alleged false allegations made about the Scottish Government's legal advice over the judicial review brought by Salmond. The move came after all opposition parties indicated they would back a motion of no confidence in Swinney last week if he did not comply, with the SNP government facing defeat if it goes ahead. Pope Francis is visiting parts of northern Iraq that were held by Islamic State militants on the third day of his historic trip to the country. Christians were among those targeted by IS when they seized the region in 2014, carrying out human rights abuses. The Pope prayed among ruined churches in Mosul, the former IS stronghold, before meeting Christians in Karakosh. He also celebrated Mass at a stadium in Erbil with thousands of people attending despite COVID concerns. Iraq, which has seen more than 13,500 deaths with COVID-19 and more than 726,000 cases, has recorded a sharp increase in infections over the past month. The 84-year-old leader of the Catholic Church and his entourage have all been vaccinated, but Iraq only received its first batch of doses last week. China's foreign minister says allegations his country is carrying out genocide against Muslim ethnic Uyghurs are ridiculously absurd and a complete lie. Wang Yi made the comments during his annual news conference today. A number of nations, including the US, have used the term to describe Chinese treatment of Uyghur people. China has been accused of carrying out forced sterilization on Uyghur women and separating children from their families. The United Nations says at least 1 million members of the Muslim minority are being held in the camps, which China says provide vocational training and are aimed at eradicating extremism. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman jailed in Iran on spying charges, has had her ankle tag removed at the end of her 5-year sentence. However, her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, has been told a new court case against her is scheduled for next Sunday. The charity worker had been under house arrest in Tehran since being moved from jail last March. She's always denied the charges against her. The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, said she should be allowed to return to the UK. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, highly anticipated TV interview with Oprah Winfrey, is set to air in the US later tonight. It marks the first sit-down interview with the couple since they quit their roles as senior working royals last year. In a clip released earlier this week, Meghan said it was really liberating to now feel able to speak for herself. The interview with Oprah Winfrey will air in the US on CBS and the UK on ITV at 9 p.m. tomorrow. It comes as Buckingham Palace is investigating claims the Duchess bullied royal staff at Kensington Palace. The report about allegations of bullying levelled at Meghan came after the interview with Oprah was recorded. Meghan has called it the latest attack on her character in 2 clips released earlier by CBS. Meghan said Buckingham Palace could not expect her and Prince Harry to be silent if it was perpetuating falsehoods about them, as she alleges, while Harry drew parallels between the treatment of his late mother. And finally, a group of teachers have filmed a parody video ahead of the return of students to their classrooms tomorrow. 4 teachers from the King's School in Rochester banded together for a lockdown version of the 1995 Take That hit Back for Good. It's sung by school principal Ben Charles, head of the prep school Tom Morgan, and Catherine Openshaw, headmistress of the nursery and pre-prep school. Chaplain Father Padfield also features in the video. The usual lyrics have been changed to reflect the current pandemic, with the group singing, and I'm going to say that he's not singing them, "We'll be together, fingers crossed now for forever, we'll be fighting and forever we will be, so complete in our hope that we will never be locked down again." Let's see if the students take that to number 1 in the charts, but that is the latest. Here on Sputnik News, I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Correction. A very, very good friend of mine, I'll spare his blushes, who knows everything about the Royals. He's a very big royalist himself. He knows everything. He's corrected me from a ghastly error. Meghan and Harry are getting nothing from the Oprah interview. It's Oprah that's getting the $10 million. My good friend, I'm very, very grateful for the correction. They have done the $100 million deal with Netflix, and the book deal is on its way. but I shouldn't leave the impression, as I would have done if I were not corrected by my friend, the sage of all matters royal, that they're not getting paid for the Oprah interview. The NHS workers are not getting paid much either, at least not much extra. So my second poll of the evening is, do NHS workers deserve more than a 1% pay rise? It's quite simple. It's binary, if you're allowed to be binary these days. A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Now, I think I can say we have seldom had a post bag as voluminous, as divided, and as acerbic as the one we've had tonight on the Meghan and Harry story, which is why I'm particularly glad that we are joined by my former parliamentary colleague, the Right Honourable Norman Baker, former Home Office Minister, former Lib Dem Member of Parliament, another Scotsman, I'm afraid. There's a lot of us around. We have a footprint everywhere in the country and in the world. He is an author, a mean author, I tell you. His book, The Strange Death of Dr. David Kelly, is the mainstay of my film, Killing Kelly, which will be out very soon indeed. And indeed, the Right Honourable Norman Baker is an executive producer of that film. Now, he presents on Sunday night his own music show on radio, and he's been good enough to join us for the final hour, and we'll be taking calls on it. Welcome, Norman Baker. Very glad
George, to be with you again.
Great to see you. Norman, some people say that they don't give a toss about royal matters, but they give a toss about it enough to write in enormous volume and at length with their opinion on this. Now, you've written some cracking books, but you also wrote a book about the royals, which, if your publicist is listening, you ought to get back out there being marketed right now, because you're the one that's got the sharpest view on these matters. Some issues that many people didn't even know existed. The secret votes, for example, in Parliament, the rote system, the pre-legislative approval that the royal family are able to exercise, for another example. So along comes the biggest royal story in many years, this extraordinary fallout inside the family. Give us your overview of that, first and foremost.
Well, the first thing, George, to say, and you'll know this from political parties, is that when there's a civil war inside a political party or an organisation, nobody wins. So the palace isn't going to win this one, and Harry and Meghan aren't going to win this one either. And what will happen is that respect for the monarchy will decrease, and respect for Harry and Meghan, I think, will decrease. And if you look at the history of TV interviews, whether it's Princess Diana or whether it's Prince Charles or Prince Andrew in his car crash interview with Emily Maitlis, none of these interviews turn out well, do they? So, you know, I look at this and I look at what people are saying. Some people are saying Harry and Meghan are badly done by. Others are saying that they've let the Queen down. My view is it's a plague on both their houses, because the royal family themselves made it very difficult for Meghan to incorporate herself. They don't like strong women. They didn't like Princess Diana. First of all, she was told not to say anything in public for years. And their view of women is that they should be an adjunct to their man and be seen and not heard, and just be a simpering sidekick.
Well, Meghan you say that, Norman, but I know Princess Anne vaguely. She's about as strong a woman as it's possible to be.
Yes, but she's born to the family. I'm talking about people who've married into the family, and they're outsiders, and that's how they're expected to behave. So Meghan didn't fit that bill. So the palace has mishandled Meghan all the way through. But having said that, Harry and Meghan are rather full of themselves. They seem to think the world is standing by to listen to their pearls of wisdom whenever they drop from their mouths. And of course, at the same time, they're exploiting the royal connection, which they're now disowning, in order to get massive amounts of money from Netflix and everything else. So I don't have very much sympathy with them. I don't have much sympathy with the royal family either.
Let's go back then to first principles. In what way did the royal family make it difficult for Meghan? You know more than me, but they certainly rolled out the red carpet for our wedding.
Well, for the wedding, yes, but that was an event they wanted to promote themselves at. I mean, what happened to Meghan was that she was brought in there. She was told what she could wear. She was foisted upon her greys and other unflattering colours. She was told what nail varnish colours she could have, how to cross her legs, not to speak in public. She'd have to learn the ways of the royal family, and try to submerge this personality, which she has, was not wise or achievable. But that's what they did.
Now, you say all that. I presume you know it, or you wouldn't be saying it. You're not that sort of a chap. Sounds a bit surprising to me, but I'll accept your word for it. But if you are going to be, if you're going to have royalty, if you're going to have a royal family, you do have to have everyone pulling the same way, don't you? Let me give you an example of what I mean. It is the job of the British royal family, acting as the head of state, to have as decent relations as is possible with, say, the President of the United States. Therefore, you can't have members, minor members of the royal family, openly insulting the President of the United States because they don't like his politics. Can you?
Well, I agree with that point, but the key word you had there, George, was minor. If you look at other royal families in Europe, whether it's the Benelux countries or the Scandinavian royal families, they have a much, and in the Japanese for the same matter, actually, they have a much narrower royal family. And the royal family there is the monarch and his or her spouse, and the next in line, and perhaps the grandchildren, and that's it. They don't have these massive royal families that we do. The front of my book, which you'll have mentioned, and I'm going to wave it to you here, 44 members of the royal family on the front of on the balcony here. What are they all doing? Why are we paying for these people? So Harry and Meghan, because they're not directly in line, because Charles is and his Charles's children are, then they don't have a role in the same way. They should be out there working, as indeed they are now doing in a fashion. So, because our royal family is so enormous, that's when you try to apply that rule, but it needn't be that way. One other difference is this. In the European monarchies, you can have a monarchy in the Benelux countries or the Scandinavian countries, and in those countries, they've moved with the times. They recognise democracy. The monarchs take an oath of allegiance to democracy. In this country, we, as subjects, have to take an oath of allegiance to an elected person.
Well, you and I, many times, had to swear our allegiance, not only to Her Majesty, but all her heirs and successors.
Yes, and isn't that wrong, George? Isn't it wrong that when we won an election, fair and square, we then have to take an oath to an unelected person in order to discharge our duties in the House of Commons?
It's entirely wrong, which is why I never swore it on a holy book. I instead averred it. I can't remember the word now, but I did so because I wasn't prepared to swear that falsehood on a Bible. But if I had not taken the oath, and you the same, we wouldn't even have been allowed to sit down, let alone get our wages.
I would have got fined, actually. We would have been fined for it as well.
Really?
No, I mean, I didn't swear on the Bible either. And what I did was I gave my own oath, which I gave studiously and then garbled through the official one. But when I read Hansard the next day, what I'd given as my oath didn't appear. All that appeared was the official oath. So even Hansard was corrupted to reflect this.
Yeah, it's a big... I mean, we've got the royal family. We've got a monarchy. It's not going to change in your lifetime or mine, Norman.
I think it is. I think it is, actually. I think it's going to change after the Queen gives way to Prince Charles. I think it will change then, because there's a lot of loyalty to the Queen as a person and a belief that she's done a reasonable job. I don't think the same thing applies to Prince Charles. and his heirs and successors. So I think it may well change.
You think Britain will become a republic?
I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime, but I think we're moving in that direction. And what I would say to Prince Charles, he won't take advice from me, but what I would say to him is this: the tree that doesn't bend is going to break. If I were he, I'd be reforming the royal family pretty damn quick.
Well, if I were he, I'd be passing the job on to my son, William, who is terrifically popular, I can tell you.
Well, of course, that breaks the whole ethos of hereditary principle, which is what they're desperate to hang on to.
Yeah, but let's go back then to Meghan and Harry. You make good points that they are minor royals. Of course, God forbid if anything happened to Charles and William and all of William's children, then Harry gets the gig. But that's not likely, and let's hope not. But minor will accept. But they're making money out of their royalness whilst micturating on royalness. That's hypocrisy, isn't it?
It is hypocrisy, totally. And I'm all in favour of people being able to walk out the royal family. If they don't find it comfortable and they'd rather be in Los Angeles, then good luck to them. I don't mind that at all. But what they cannot do is opt out of the royal family and then trade on the royal family connection to make a lot of money. I mean, look, we would not have these people all over the world apparently tuning in tonight to watch Harry and Meghan, and we would have ITN paying, ITV paying, what was that, £1 million?
They paid $1 million, yeah.
If they weren't members of the royal family. So they want to have their cake and eat it. That's the problem. So, let them go off and do what they want to do. I wish them well. I don't wish them any harm at all. But they should surrender their HRH status, just become private citizens. They're hanging on to that, and they shouldn't do.
Let's deal finally then with the elephant in the room. The defenders of Harry and Meghan either infer or imply rather, or sometimes openly state that it's because Meghan is black. She's not black, she's mixed race, but she's politically speaking black. Is there anything in that charge?
Well, I think there's something in the charge, not that she's black particularly, but she's regarded, I don't say this, but I think the palace regards her as an obstreperous woman who should be in her place. That's their view on the matter. She's American, which they don't like very much, and she's kind of uppity. I'm using their words rather than my words. I think that's more of an issue than anything else. And I have to say, we've had this spin coming out of the palace this week about alleged bullying. I don't know whether it's bullying or not. There was evidence, there was some suggestion that bullying did take place, but that was years ago. And the point is that we've had bullying from Prince Andrew, for example. Nothing's been done about that. There's been no palace inquiry about that. And it's very convenient, isn't it, for the palace to suddenly announce an inquiry this week before the television appearance. I mean, that's a really bad spin.
Yes. Where will it all end?
Well, it won't end happily. It won't end happily at all. And there'll be damage done. And I think Charles needs to reflect on this. Charles, rather than anybody else, needs to reflect on this. And if he wants the royal family to continue 50 years' time, he's going to have to reinvent it a bit. There's no sign he's going to do that. And I think if he doesn't do that, then I fear we may be in for the end of the royal family. And not in my lifetime, but in 30, 40 years. It's going that way now. They're very out of touch with the public at large. And they're relying on the Queen's popularity. Well, that's going to go at some point.
Show us the front of your book again, Norman, if you would.
There we are. It's,
when Norman sent that book to me, I almost didn't read it because I'm not really interested in the royals. But it is an absolutely riveting read. It's a book about the royals, but not as you know it, not as you know them. It's a look at the politics behind monarchy. And some things in it are quite eye-opening. And I was a member of Parliament for almost 30 years. I never knew them till I read them in Norman Baker's book. Norman, thank you for that. And What Do You Do by Norman Baker is my recommendation for your reading list this week. Thanks, Norman, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Do NHS workers deserve more than a 1% pay increase? Quite shocking numbers. Only 43% of you say yes. 57% of you say no. What do you mean no? Call me and justify that no. 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, I'm spitting mad, and if you're watching on Facebook, you already know the reason why. My interview that I've just conducted there with the Right Honourable Norman Baker, my former parliamentary colleague, was taken down by Facebook because France 2, French TV 2, put in a copyright complaint claiming that they owned the interview. They owned an interview between me and my former parliamentary colleague, Norman Baker. This is insane. How could you possibly own me or Norman Baker? They then withdrew their copyright claim, but not before we'd lost 70% of our Facebook audience. So I'm here to tell you, France 2, whoever you are, I am going to sue you for a substantial sum of money for loss of audience because of your absolutely fraudulent claim, absurd and fraudulent claim, that you owned an interview I was conducting live with Norman Baker about the British royal family. Lèse-majesté. You can take your own royals to the tumbrils and decapitate them if you please, but you will not stop me speaking to another British parliamentarian about the British royal family. So be on your alert, France 2. My lawyers are coming to get you in the morrow. That means tomorrow. Now, here's a call from Georgie in Spalding on the NHS 1% pay rise. Georgie, welcome.
Hiya, George.
Hi.
Good to speak to you.
And you.
Hi, I've not long got in. I've only done a 7-hour shift today, only half an hour.
I've got to tell you,
even.
Georgie, almost 60% of the votes say that you do not deserve more than a 1% pay rise. Does that strike you as surprising?
Well, yeah, it does actually. But, you know, we've got to listen to it. What I'm thinking is, do they think we are just sticking up for ourselves? I'm a member of a party that looks after all workers, and, you know, any worker struggles like the British Gas abysmal fire and rehire thing, anybody that's having any problems, I'm there. I'm your man. Well, I'm not your man, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And my main reason is the safety aspect, patient safety, because we won't ever be able to attract nurses into the profession if we don't value us, basically.
Especially with a lot of nursing staff from lower wage economies no longer coming here and some returning.
Absolutely. And the other thing is we're going to lose staff as well. And we're in this tricky thing where, you know, striking. We want to keep patients safe, but that is something that even the Royal College of Nursing are talking about. And I believe they've got 35 million, I might have got that wrong, in a strike fund ready. So this is quite serious stuff. I've spoken to my colleagues, you know, just done an unscientific survey, and they're really hacked off with it. But you do still get some nurses that will say, no, there's not enough money. Where are we going to get it from? Well, let me tell you, and you know this yourself, that the wealth in this country, and we are the 5th or 6th richest nation, aren't we? It is generated by the workers, the working class. So there is a danger that we could look like we're separatists, as it were, and we're just sticking up for ourselves. But that's not the thing. The NHS is a major employer as well, isn't it? So, you know, we can't let them ride roughshod over us. And I think they're going to, if they get away with this, they're going to actually undermine everything in the NHS. They're already privatising it by stealth, as you know, and it's just going to get worse. And 1%, with inflation, it's actually negative. And all we're actually asking for is a restorative pay. We're actually 20% down on wages, and we're just asking for 15%. And I think we should get it, and I think everybody should be behind us, because it's going to affect all of us. If you need a hospital, you are going to need nurses. And it's not just the nurses, it's all the NHS staff. Sorry, I prattled on a bit longer.
No, you haven't. You've set the scene for what is likely, based on this poll, to be quite a contentious point. So do NHS workers deserve more than a 1% pay rise? Georgie in Spalding believes so, but only 41% of you on the poll do think so, while 59% of you think the NHS workers do not deserve more than a 1% pay rise. Where does that mentality come from? Thanks, Georgie, for that call. Now, a copyright claim update. France TV is the French national state-owned broadcaster for France. They took this show off the air. There's the dispute claim. 37 seconds of video belongs to them. 30 seconds of a live interview between me and Norman Baker, the French state television claims belongs to them. Well, I am as angry about that as it is possible to be. The lèse-majesté of it. So, if you're watching, I intend to sue you. The claim has now been withdrawn, of course, because it was perfectly absurd. And the stream has been restored on Facebook, of course, but not before I lost 70% of my Facebook audience. I've had it with these algorithms and these fake copyright claims. The audience is growing by the second as people are coming back. But they lost an important interview between me and Norman Baker, and I've just had it. I'm not going to put up with it anymore. Here's a call from Guy in Stoke-on-Trent. He's always worth hearing. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, good evening, George. Yeah, I'm not with the groupthink with Meghan and Harry, George.
Tell me.
I actually think that Meghan's been vilified.
Oh, yeah? Go ahead.
Well, she's recently taken the Mail to Crown Court, and she's won a libel case.
No, it wasn't libel. It was copyright. They printed a letter that she had written to her father, a rather unbecoming letter, There was no libel involved. There's no doubt as to its authenticity. It was a copyright claim, and she won it, yes.
Yeah. Harry's taken the same paper to court, and the damages he was awarded, he's given to the Invictus Games charity.
Yeah.
Now there's numerous examples of how the press have treated Meghan in one way and Kate in an opposite way. Whether it's the way they caressed the bump when they were carrying the child. Kate, it was a loving affair. With Meghan, it was showy and it was for the cameras. Whether it was the bouquet at the wedding reception. Believe it or not, apparently the bouquet Meghan carried put one of the princess's lives at risk. Now, George, I ain't interested in the royal family, but it shows the hypocrisy of the press and how that couple has been vilified. Now, and I wish them all the luck in the world. And if they can sell whatever it is they sell, their life story, to whoever wants to buy it, good luck to them. I won't be buying it. I don't buy a low. I won't watch the interview. I'm not that bothered in them. But in the same way as Norman Baker's interested in the politics, you cannot dispute that couple have been vilified by the right-wing media.
Tell me why you think that is, then.
Well, okay then, George. Why is it that...
No, I don't. You've given good
George,
examples. No, Guy, you've given good examples. I'm asking you why you think the media have done that.
Has she refused to play ball with the royal family? Is it that she won't do what she's supposed to do?
Aren't you supposed to do what you're supposed to do? If you marry into the royal family, doesn't that presuppose you're going to actually do the job?
George, George, I'm guessing because I've never been up there. I've never been up to the palace. I don't know what you need to do. What I would say is that if this family does not regroup and think what they're going to do, they're not going to last a great deal. It's a terrible institution. It puts those people's lives under great stress, and they're viewed from all millions and billions of people in the world. It's unhealthy.
You're right about that, unhealthy. It's probably going to be the most viewed interview in Oprah's history, and she's had some blockbusters. What does it tell us about our societies? Not just ours, but American society, which is supposed to be a republic. What's the enduring attraction of royalty, do you think?
All I can imagine is it's from the cradle to the grave. We're nurtured that there's this supreme family, and they're royals, and they're this, that, and the other, and many people. But there are also many people who do not follow it and won't watch it and aren't interested.
Very interesting call. Thanks, Guy. It's always good not to follow the herd and to have your own point of view on it. I'm still shocked at the NHS poll, and it's actually getting worse. Only 41% of you now think that the offer of 1% is not good enough. Terry says they made their choice. They should be free to live their lives how they like. And Sam says, I wish Harry and Meghan would have their Sussex titles stripped and go off into their own world. No one really cares about what they have to say or whinge about. So many more important things. And Merrick says, everything every young man dreams of but will never have has been given to Harry free of charge. Palaces, castles, millions in the bank, the best food and drink, best healthcare, best education, private jets, which he flies around the world, shooting wild animals while lecturing us about animal welfare and climate change, and a Hollywood actress for a wife who wouldn't look twice at him if he was skint. For American viewers, skint means you don't have any money. Instead of whining and blubbering about how hard life is, he should get down on his knees, thanking God for his great unearned good fortune. And Mubashir says, I don't think I agree with you about Meghan. You say she is a second or third-rate actress from a third-rate show, but at least she has some talent. What talent does the royal family have? How did they accumulate all this wealth? Why should we care so much about them? What about Prince Andrew? Where is the investigation? Where is the media coverage about him like there is about Meghan? Also, what exactly did Meghan say or do to get so much hate? How can they have the audacity to call her a bully, considering how they treated Diana? And Teresa says the public will have been told on a need-to-know basis. The Queen and Prince Philip welcomed Meghan. She was invited to take part in the family celebrations before they were married, which is very unusual. What do they want? Let's hear from Ian in Hounslow on the nurses. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George.
Hi.
I'm a retired nurse,
Yeah.
and I'm a bit concerned about the health unions trying to take some credibility over waiving this, we're not happy with this 1% offer. Now, they've got a poor track record, particularly the RCN, which colluded with previous Tory governments to divide union efforts to get a fair deal for workers. Also, they treated whistleblowers, namely Graham Pink, very, very badly. So they can't be trusted. Do you know there were 75,000 assaults on NHS staff last year? I didn't hear about 75,000 prosecutions, did you?
No, I'm shocked at that number.
They're falling down on the job. There's lots of things they could have done and they haven't done, like the nursing bursary, which was a disaster, charging nurses and doctors and cleaners to park at the hospital where they work. And childcare costs need $2,000 a year. They haven't brought in workplace creches like we had during the war in the factories.
And
These
like
are all
they've got in Parliament.
Exactly, yeah. These are working women, working mothers, struggling to put food on the table, especially if the husbands are on 0 hours contracts or even out of work. And the unions really, I think, have really got a case to answer. And it's this campaigning for another 1% is a smokescreen for where they've fallen down on the job. That's all I've got to say, George.
Well, very powerfully made. Thanks, Ian. Let's go to Eric in New Jersey, who's a new caller. Go ahead, Eric.
Yes, hi, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Just take your time. You're a new caller. We want to hear from you.
All right. Yeah, George, so I very much enjoyed listening to your show and hearing what many have to say about a range of topics. The concern or the reason for my call today has to do with the YouTube sort of threat that I saw, that if anyone questions something about COVID, they'll be banned. And that just came off as very concerning to me, because I feel that nowadays if someone shows some skepticism or questions certain narratives, they are immediately labeled as a conspiracy theorist.
Well, you might well be a conspiracy theorist, but you're certainly not banned. You're on the air. You're on the show.
No,
go ahead.
But I'm
go ahead. Give me your conspiracy theory.
No, George. I'm not. I'm talking about the YouTube stream. Like if someone writes on the YouTube stream, when your show is live, it says there's a pin that says if you mention anything against COVID and quote unquote is conspiracy, you will be banned from the writing on the chat.
Well, I don't know about that. Obviously, I'm not on the YouTube. I'm here in front of the camera. So you're on the show. Tell me what you would have liked to have written if you hadn't been threatened with a ban.
No, it has to do with liberty, George. Of course, I know.
Yeah, of course. This is a pretty liberated platform and a pretty liberated show, but it can't be unlimited, alas, because we are on other people's platforms, and we don't want to get banned from them, Eric.
But if someone speaks against COVID on YouTube, you guys will get in trouble by YouTube?
Yes.
For doing such a thing?
Well, I presume so. Right. I don't know what you're talking about, but that is a logical inference I'm making from what you've told me. We don't want to get banned from YouTube. or from Facebook, because that will mean that none of the good things on this show will be seen or heard by anyone. Can you grasp that?
I can, but the thing is that I feel that many people have spoken out against COVID regulations regularly on YouTube and other sources. So I don't know. That's where I don't know where it's coming from.
I don't either, but I'm asking you for the third time, why don't you give me a blast of your point of view?
All right, well, I'll have it. All right, I'll ask you straight. Do you believe that one has the right to breathe fresh air, George? Or are we to be forced to breathe our own carbon dioxide and wear masks forever?
I don't think we're going to wear masks forever. In fact, in Texas, you no longer wear a mask at all. But if you're asking me, is it common sense in the middle of a pandemic, which is making millions sick and a significant number of them die, then I'm a mask wearer. I'm a supporter.
Which is fine. And I'm not, if you wish to wear masks or do whatever you like, go right ahead. But okay, and let me go back a bit. So here in New York and New Jersey, we have dictators who have emergency power orders, which, by the way, Montesquieu, we tried to incorporate the philosophy of Montesquieu, which is to separate the branches of government, meaning the legislature is supposed to write the laws, not the executive branch. Now, they've been granting themselves emergency powers the same way Hitler did, and are putting forth mask mandates, which are just out of control, and putting tons of people, the small mom and pop shops, out of business, have been making everybody's lives miserable as hell for the past year. And it's just absolutely disgusting, in my view, that people cannot speak against mask mandates by dictators. We have a dictator, Murphy, governor of New Jersey, and we have a dictator, Cuomo, governor of New York. It's absolutely disgusting, and I think more people should be allowed and able to speak out against it.
Well, you have done so very eloquently and loudly on this very platform, so thanks for doing it. Richard is in Manchester, in England, not in the United States. Go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, George. Thank you ever so much for putting me on. A great show by Manchester United today. Absolutely wonderful.
Totally wonderful. I'm so happy about it. Can't wait for match of the day.
I went to my daughter's to have a late lunch and then we watched it together. She said, "What do you think, Dad? What score?" I said, "Well, it's going to be 3-0 for Manchester United." She said, "I think you're crazy."
Well, that was a good call. I mean, it didn't quite get to 3-0, but I was terrified of today. And so I'm even more unusually happy.
Yeah, wonderful. George, can I talk to you, please, about the Scottish nationalists and their effort to, depart from the UK, which I've got friends up in Scotland, and they're a bit disappointed about the whole thing. The whole thing has become...
The tide is turning, though, Richard.
Yes, I know. I've seen the whole show again tonight, and I'm very pleased about that. But what happened with her? She's got... she just got this complex of being the Queen of Scotland eventually, I'm pretty sure. And I don't know why or how this has grown over the last few years. I saw the Salmond interview with the committee, and I thought he did very, very well. And I have no axe to grind. He was found not guilty by a court of law, of which Mrs. Sturgeon is the Prime Minister, as such, the First Minister, as she tells everybody, of the country.
Yes, and by the way, Richard, a majority of the jury which cleared Alex Salmond on all charges were women. And the judge was also a woman.
Exactly, and it's proven beyond all doubt. And then she goes on the show, in front of the committee, and it's told that under the guise of giving a COVID chat on the television, 1 hour per day, that she said she did not agree with that and that he was guilty. That's not word verbatim, but words of that effect.
She gave that impression, yeah. She didn't use those exact words, of course, but she gave that impression,
I think that is absolutely despicable, George, to put an innocent man or threaten in any way to put an innocent man in jail for life. And this is what is coming out now, because everybody has been telling lies. And I don't know what you think, but I would expect some people are going to go to jail for this.
I hope so. I believe that they should. I think the wheels have come off the conspiracy against Alex Salmond, and more people, only 1/3 of the people in the poll this morning think that Nicola Sturgeon has been totally honest about the Alex Salmond affair. I feel vindicated. When I started out questioning all of this, I felt isolated and lonely and attacked. But now, as happens from time to time,
well, you look very relaxed tonight, George.
Well,
Can I just take a...
Yeah, quickly, Richard.
Very quickly, one more point. It's about these people, the old brigade of Heseltine and Adonis and Blair and Campbell and so on, are all trying to get us back into the EU.
Yeah,
and I noticed today that the Reform Party, unfortunately, they're going to lose their leader. But they've come out with the fact that, you know, they tried to smash our democracy, these people, when we were fighting for 4 years, a fight to get out of the EU.
Yeah.
And now these very, very, very wealthy people are trying to get us back in.
Yeah,
And I don't
although that's like launching a campaign to, again, insist that the earth is flat. The British will never rejoin the European Union. In fact, the existence of the European Union is a very much bigger question. Will the EU continue to exist? Thanks for the call, Rich. John in Dorset is up next. Go ahead, John.
George, pleasure to talk to you, mate.
And you, sir.
I don't quite know whether that I'm spoiling the party here, but I just wanted to ask you what you think of my opinion, which is that the working man, which I am, well, was till I retired, is being demonised, I think is a fashionable word to use. Well, I do feel that there is a concerted effort to make us all look like a load of nanas.
Yeah, I do. I think that working class culture, working class language, working class self-identification and so on are all under attack and have been for really rather a long time. And the left is largely responsible for that. What passes for the left, liberalism is what I call it, but they would call themselves left.
Yeah.
So that, you know, personal pronouns, identity politics, the whole trans issue, the insistence that everything is about race and gender and sex and color and so on. All of these are driving the working class into a corner.
Well, I think it's a distraction, George. In my humble opinion, everything you just said there, I totally agree with, which is unusual for me because I like to have a little chit-chat. Well, look, I see this as a bit like the Industrial Revolution, except it's the computer revolution. I do think that all these huge, great multinational tech companies are going to find the working man is redundant, basically, before they even... I think it's a slow process, but I think it's speeding up by the minute.
Well, yeah, maybe, but, you know, everything, I'm looking around here, everything I see was made by a worker. If you look out your window, everything you see was made by a worker. The problem increasingly is that it wasn't made by a worker here. It was made by a worker somewhere else. But everything that we have and use and need is grown by or made by a worker. So I don't believe that the working class is disappearing. And I don't believe that robots will take over the world, that we can do without workers. Obviously, if we can cut the hours, if we can cut the age of retirement and so on, because we can share the work out more conveniently, then of course I'm in favour of that. But we'll always need the working class. That's my view,
well, look,
John.
Let me just have one more quick point before you go, or I go, I should say.
Yeah.
Take an average street, and you've got two human beings. There's one on one side of the road, another one on this side of the road. Now, this bloke on my side of the road goes out to work at 7 o'clock in the morning, comes back about 8 o'clock at night, and he's worked his arse off all day. He gets hammered by Inland Revenue. He winds up like I am now. I've always been self-employed, and unbeknownst to me, I was working against myself. Anyway, I don't want to go on about me. But anyway, the bloke on the other side of the road signs on the dole. Now, there are certain people in the Labour government. They seem to favour they seem to all rush to him like an army of what do you call them?
Social workers,
care workers, social workers, and take care of him or her.
Well,
and they seem to
look. Just because of the hour, John, I need to move on. I would just say this: I believe in a society where if you can work, you must work. Not should, but you must work. But if the society we're in cannot offer you work, then it is the duty of all of us to support the family of the people who want to work but are not being allowed to work because of the system, economic system that we have. Now, there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I saw this film this afternoon called A United Kingdom. Now, this was the story of Prince Suretsi Kama of Bechuanaland.
It's a wonderful film. I've seen it.
Oh, God, yeah. And he's marrying of Ruth Williams, and the marriage wasn't accepted by both the countries. But you see, why I'm ringing up was all the lies and all the cover-ups of the British government. It was in the latest 40s and 50s, as you probably know. And it showed Tony Benn helping Suretsi Kama to eventually get back.
He did,
to his
yes.
place. Yeah. And that Ruth Williams, she was such a brave woman, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I found it ever so powerful.
It was a very moving film. I liked it very much. I'm surprised it hasn't been a more successful film.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was about 5 years ago, I think it was made.
Yeah.
But you did mention on your Twitter account about you were so a tribute to your father, you know, because
This is his death anniversary, my father, yes.
Yes.
24 years ago today.
Yes. And I can remember my mother, who died when I was quite young, actually, but she was a great follower of all the things going on in the world. And she said to me at the time, Ruth Williams was such a brave woman because, those people had so much of a problem between their country, our country, but our government, really. I mean, I know they still tell lies.
Yeah, I mean, it is important, the point you make, because she suffered racism in Africa against her.
Yeah.
And he suffered racism in Britain when he was here against him. And she suffered racism, or rather, she suffered from hostility from people here in Britain about her marrying an African.
I know. And I mean, in the end, it said at the end of the film that the son, they had a son after the daughter, is now the proper ruler of Bechuanaland. And, it was a happy ending, really, for a blooming change.
It was, but it was quite heavy lifting to get there. It's called A United Kingdom, is it?
It's called It's a funny name, isn't it? But it's trying to unite that kingdom with the two,
A United Kingdom. I also recommend it. It's a very, very nice film with a happy ending, but a lot of struggle to get to that happy ending. Of course, that's not to say I agree with kings and hereditary power and so on. I really, really don't, Norma. I don't know if you do. Are you a royal supporter?
No, I agree with a lot of the Norman, what was his name?
Norman Baker, yeah.
I thought he spoke quite a lot of sense, really. Anyway, listen, George, I had a lovely birthday.
Happy birthday.
I did have a lovely one, and I had a meal delivered by my favourite restaurant, which I've told you about before, and we advertise it as Box E, because They
Box
are super.
E delivered your
Super.
birthday dinner. Fantastic.
Oh, it was brilliant.
Many
Brilliant.
happy returns, Norma, and regards to your husband. Thanks very much for the call. The poll is closed. 59% of you think NHS workers do not deserve more than a 1% pay rise. Only 41% of you think NHS workers do deserve more than a 1% pay rise. That is quite remarkable. It shows the power of propaganda, the ease with which workers can be divided, that the nurses get more than 1% takes no potatoes off your plate. If you say there's no money to pay nurses more than 1%, then what about the trillions that we've spent in this catastrophe over the last 12 months? What about the hundreds of billions that we've wasted? What about the billions, tens of billions, that have been possibly fraudulently siphoned off to the friends and supporters of the government party, and in some cases, even the family members? I hope you're angry about these things and that you don't allow yourselves to be turned against the nurses who you were clapping for not so many weeks ago. France TV, I'm coming to get you. It's been marvellous. Thanks for watching.